Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pinecker, and I'm really excited about this guest that we have on today. Now, just to give you an update, I know we're still in the temporary studios as we speak, staying at my neighbor's house. As our new home is being built, I can look and see it out this window right now. And what's so cool is not only do we have a new home, but it also includes a new studio. So this is very exciting times here at MBR, and we're hoping to be moved into the place by the end of the month. Now, I'm going to be sitting down here with a very interesting guest. Love him or hate him, and there's a lot of people on both camps. Bill Reel has agreed to come on the program and basically have a no holds barred conversation. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and we're going to have an oral history of Bill Reel, why he got involved in this space, why did he start Mormon Discussion Inc. Why the heck is he using AI to make books? We're going to talk about all these really interesting things, and I'm very fascinated by it. And I've been able to page through these books, and Bill, it's really interesting stuff what AI is capable of doing. So that's the catalyst of our conversation, but this is going to be an all-encompassing conversation at the same time. Bill Reel, man, welcome to the program.
Man, glad to be here, Steve. You and I don't get a chance to interact a ton, but we have done a few little things together. The Richard Nygren affair was one
Yes.
that you and I got together on. We both have had to deal with some things with a guy by the name of Dives Lazarus that's been a little interesting. So we've had little
Yes.
moments where we've had chances to uh, interact with each other, and I think I've always felt deeply respected by you and treated fairly by you. So kudos to you for who you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. And that's what we try to do is create a safe space for all of our guests and all views here at MBR. It's really important that we document this period of time in the early 21st century history of Mormonism. A lot of things are happening, and a lot of these things are happening in real time. And I think it's really important for scholars to understand that we're going to try to document these stories in real time and also provide oral histories so that people can see what was going on during this really interesting, uh, really extraordinary time within Mormon history. Probably some of the most active since probably the 1840s when you stop and think about it. So, Bill, I wanted to talk. We're going to talk, like I said, it's going to be we're going to talk about a lot of things. But since this is Mormon Book Reviews, and that's what we talk about. I wanted to start with these these books. Now, it's not without controversy for some people to be using AI to make books. And from my understanding, you can clarify what the process is that what you basically have done is you had AI go through a lot of the episodes that you've done on Mormon Discussion Inc. about particular topics, and then have it basically create these books based on the materials used and the sources used in your presentations that you do in your programs. So I just want you to explain to me the process, like how does this work and what gave you the idea about doing this? And I'm assuming like even the images are AI produced. Is this okay? So just tell us about this process. I'd like to know. I always tell people don't criticize the product until you understand the process. So maybe talk us through the process of creating these books.
Yeah, so if I go back, again, done a ton of episodes on history, and I've been involved in Mormon history and understanding the crucial issues to Mormonism's truth claims and the historical documentation behind that. Really, ever since I joined the church in 1996, I dove headfirst in. Before I joined the church, I read Fawn Brody's "No Man Knows My History." I was already diving into Fair Mormon was sort of at its early days farm booklets that they were stapled together that you would buy at like a church bookstore. I was on a website called New Jerusalem, and it had a man called Book of Mormon Answer Man. And so when I was going to college at Bowling Green State University, I was studying Mormonism because I wanted to be the best Mormon I could be. And I joined the church as a convert in 96. So as I've explored history over a few decades now, I feel like I understand Mormon history pretty dang well. And when RFM and I get together, Radio Free Mormon, for those who don't know, he and I have been co-hosting episodes mostly on Mormon history since 2015 and 16. And explored various issues. There are episodes that I'm really proud of, things that we have put documents up on the screen, started at point A, end at point Z, and by the end of the episode, I think the viewer gets to see Mormon history laid out around a difficult issue in a more comprehensive way than I think anyone else on the internet had done or has done. So a few months back, I thought, I know what issues are the most problematic. I know what issues uh, I can best explain, where I know what the logical questions are that end with the church not being what it claims to be. And I said, you know what? It'd be really easy in the age of AI to go and tell ChatGPT, for instance, the work that I've done on that issue, uh, the points that people need to be sure are covered, like the things you can't miss. If you're covering the Kirtland Safety Banking Society, cover, for instance, the death threat that Joseph Smith made to somebody. If you're covering the 1886 revelation of John Taylor, you also need to cover the 1933 moment where several apostles and the president of the church who were at the 1904 trial of John W. Taylor, where they are dishonest claiming that 1886 revelation doesn't exist. So in all the difficult issues, there are these important subpoints that maybe are lacking in the general discussion when that topic comes up. I thought, I could probably put together 20 or 30 little mini chapters
Yep.
where I explain to somebody a problematic issue. Yeah, and it's that first book there, A Logical Deconstruction of Mormonism. And so it was my first time trying to write a book. I've got two books on Amazon that I've written. The Mormon Primer, which actually I had some help from a larger community, but it was a project that I headed up. So thanks to everybody who contributed to that. And then I wrote a book called The Mighty Change. And it was about grace and works in Mormonism. And I wrote that maybe back in like 2012. And those two books are on Amazon. And so in this project, I'm like, I don't want to spend a ton of time. I've already done the work. I've already done episodes on all of these topics. I already know what sources to point to. And so I went into ChatGPT and I said, here's all the work that I've done on that topic. Here's the things you need to make sure you include. Now you articulate this as concisely as possible. Be logical, be rational, and help the reader understand the complexity of this issue without me having to spend 3 months writing a book. And what I found was like, oh my, this can actually go really quick.
Hmm.
And so the logical deconstruction of Mormonism, I think, has 30 chapters. And each chapter is an issue that I think is deeply problematic to Mormonism, one that I think is relatively easy to explain to an audience. And I allowed AI to take my past research, work that I've done in episodes in the past, and make a book out of it. So I put it on Amazon. It didn't take long to write. Yeah, I put it on Amazon. Didn't take long to write, and it seemed to be selling faster than I thought it was going to, and the reviews were way more positive than I expected. I expected it to be sort of average, 3 star, whatever. I just wanted something out there that was easy and quick, inexpensive for me to do, that would be productive at helping people engage the difficult issues in a way that they're being told the truth, they're being given all the information, and they're allowed to go check the sources and make up their own mind. And again, I think it's like a 4.8 on Amazon. It's sold a ton of copies. And so I thought that did so well. Let me try to do this with other topics. So I went in, and by the way, if you don't, can I share my screen with you,
Sure. Absolutely. As a
Steve?
matter of fact, let me allow share screen for you.
Yeah, I just sent a request
Yep.
over.
You're allowed. Okay.
Yep. So let me try this again. Share, and this should be this one. Let's do the entire screen. That'll be okay.
Okay.
All right. So if you're seeing that screen right now,
Yep.
this was 4 categories of things that RFM and I and things before him even that I had done lots of work on. So the top one here, Mormon Truth Crisis, is me examining all the moments in Mormonism where leaders are deceiving, lying, obfuscating an issue in Mormonism. And then I document it. You can go there, you can click the sources. By the way, this is on the website, mormondiscussionpodcast.org. The next one is Mormon Paradox. This is a list of inconsistencies. So these are absurd things that if you really wrap your head around, you're like, oh, like that doesn't really make sense. Like, does Joseph Smith really know the Adamic language, or is he just rearranging English into a silly version of English? Angelsmen, for instance, being angels. Uh, so these are all the inconsistencies in Mormonism that challenge faith. The next one is prophets and fallibility. These are all the moments where Mormon leaders have changed the doctrines, policies of the church in a way that they told you on the front end, this is of God and this is the way it is and this is an eternal truth. And on the back end, they're like, yeah, we've abandoned that or we've disavowed it or we've reversed it. But the last one here is deep historical dives into Mormon history. And I'll just give an example here. This is the Kirtland Safety Society Bank, top one. This is based on the episode we did on Mormonism Live. And when the episode was over, I go into Reddit
Oh.
and I post everything, all the documents and all my thoughts on why this issue moves in this trajectory. And these are the points that should be considered. And this is why the issue is either problematic and in some cases, why the issue is in the favor of the church. For instance, when we did the tar and feathering of Joseph Smith, we actually concluded that the critics who said that Joseph is being attacked because he's trying to be intimate with one of the Johnson daughters, that there is no evidence of that. And we actually sided with the church on that one.
Hmm.
We really try to be fair and balanced. Now, we might side against the church almost always, but that's because RFM and I deeply believe that the topics, the conclusion that you come to when you dive into all the data is that there is a real problem there that doesn't work in favor of the church. But when you go through this, I'm just showing, I've got pictures of the Kirtland Safety Society notes. I've got a write-up of how RFM and I moved from issue to issue so that the person reading in the future can clearly see how we saw this issue and why we saw it as problematic.
Hmm.
And then all I do is I feed this into ChatGPT and say, look, I've already done the work.
Mhm.
What ChatGPT can do well is go find sources. It can articulate something more concisely, more logically than I can. If I say, hey, be as rational and as logical as possible when you explain this, it can decide how many chapters the book should have and what each chapter should cover. It organizes things so much better. It's not that I'm going like, hey, I don't know anything about the Kirtland Safety Society, sort of like Austin Fife writing the Light on Truth letter, right? Where he doesn't seem to actually understand the issues. This is different. This is plugging in the work that's already been done and asking AI to do a shortened project of it. And so, for instance, one book is on the Kirtland Safety Society, and it already has my information. So it's not writing the book for me completely. It's taking my work and making a book out of it. And they've been, I think, also very effective. The reviews so far in these have been really great as well. And so I think this is a very competent way to inexpensively and in a comprehensive way cover an issue without spending very much time. And I can get one of these books done in about 3 hours.
Okay, so why don't you exit out? And I have a few questions about the process and maybe some of the
Yeah.
controversies involved in using AI. So the question I have for you is, okay, so you're creating this. It takes you 3 hours to make a book. I've heard that there have been mistakes that have been found by people who've encountered these documents. What do you do to do corrective measures? And why are you, and just some people would say, well, why are you putting out a product if you're not vetting it first to make sure that these errors don't, I mean, what kind of oversight are you doing? You can have something ready in 3 hours, but there's inevitably with AI, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be errors, going to be wrong footnotes. How do you address that?
Yeah. So one of the reviews on Amazon noted that, said that the book is quite good at conveying the information that's needed to convey, but that there were, I think, one chapter, it left the footnotes off and didn't create them. And I'm worried, of course, that there could be and again, this is much more a bigger problem in the past, modern editions of the AI inferencing are doing much better, but there's always the possibility that it could hallucinate a footnote, for instance.
Hmm.
So I do try to, in my process of writing it, I do try to ask it over and over again, can you just double check the sources, make sure things are accurate? But I'll say this is a living document. So if somebody were to reach out to me and say, hey, your footnote 3 in chapter 4 is not real, I accept that that's a possibility. The moment someone notifies me of that, within 15 minutes, I can upload an revised manuscript to Amazon, and it will immediately, in any edition ordered after that, will now have the correction in it. So I'm happy to make corrections along the way. I know that people will go, why would I read something if there's the chance of being a
Right.
mistake?
Hmm.
And what I will say is that if you read one of those books, you are going to learn more factual history around that issue than you could learn anywhere on the internet reading a single source from some online blog or some website. Most of these topics are topics that there aren't books written about that topic. The 1886 revelation, for instance, you can get a pamphlet or two from the fundamentalist groups, but there isn't maybe the deep dive that I think this one does. And so I would say, while there might be some mistakes, the average Mormon who wants to know about that issue is going to learn more factual history reading that book than they would have to spend 10 hours scouring the web to try to do that, whereas they could probably read that book in a couple of hours.
So I think it's really important that we frame this in a certain way. I would almost say this is like crowdsourcing populism, populist scholarship, right? Which actually, I'm okay with that. Keeping in mind, of course, I've presented it at MHA and John Whitmer, and I'm very much in tight with the Mormon studies community and the scholarly community, and I really honor and respect the work they do. This is really just a way of for lay people to make this stuff accessible to lay people. And so in that sense, you're just trying to get information out there using the newest tools with the understanding that there could be mistakes. But the cool part is that literally a person can contact you and then you so it's almost like you're editing on the fly, you're putting out this information, but you're using the peer process is actually the readers. And that's a really interesting way of approaching it. Speak
Yeah,
to that.
and I do go through again. I'm not reading every single word, but I am skimming what it's
Hmm.
producing. I am noticing mistakes. It'll often sort of not include a thing, like it missed something. I'm like, hey, you've got to make sure this is in here. This is an important data point. And so I am working with it to try to be as accurate as possible. I think what mistakes are going to be in there are going to be extremely small, but I welcome feedback that something's not right. My goal isn't to be uh, some historian who's written 45 books and has some career as an author doing that. My goal has always been since 2012 is to help people make sense of Mormonism. And I feel like so many of the conversations, especially those on the faithful side, are obfuscating the issues in such a way that the person can't ever really figure things out. That the apologist and the church do not really want the average member of the church to understand the rabbit hole of problems in Mormonism or the complexity and problems around any one issue. So my goal has always been, how can I help as many people as possible have as much information as possible so that they can make informed decisions about what they do with their energy, their life energy in this religion. And my goal has always been to try to help people make sense of the messiness of Mormonism. And I think to that end, these books are an incredible resource.
Well, we are in the frontier. This is the new world we live in. AI is part of it. I think it's important that we explore these things. I think, just put this stuff out there and let the market decide these things too. And I like the fact that, people can have input into this. So like you said, these are living documents that will probably go through many, many revisions and corrections to the point that will probably then could be viewed as a source for reliable information that somebody could say that, yeah, this has been vetted, if you will, through the readership and through people through feedback. So it's an interesting process to do here. Now, I have a question for you, Bill, because you keep on saying too is like me and RFM in the work that you've been doing since 2015. Why is it just having your name on there and not crediting RFM in this process as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not an intentional slight towards him. Some of these things are episodes I've done, some of them are episodes we've done together. I'm not making money off this, by the way. The nonprofit is who has the stuff up there. RFM and I are both paid by the nonprofit to do the work that we do. Any sales of the books goes back into the nonprofit, and at the end of the day, we're both benefiting from that. Um, uh, Amazon, when you put something in, you have to list a main author, and you can list other contributors. But because it was just me using AI and putting all the stuff in, I had myself listed as the author, but it wasn't with any sort of intention to slight RFM, and it's not with any effort to make money that he doesn't have a chance to benefit from as well.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So I'm very fascinated by this project you're doing. I'm going to keep an eye on it, and I'm going to see the evolution of this process to see where it goes. And this is a new world that we've entered into. I know the scholars probably aren't super keen on this type of thing, but again, this is for lay people. And I do think though that maybe scholars can maybe learn some stuff from the process that actually might be able to assist them in their research, and I'm sure in many ways they are, but this is just a really interesting thing that you're doing. And it definitely bears for people to pay attention. And apparently you're getting good positive feedback from people as well. So, Bill, you've said a lot of interesting things. And again, we're going to have a conversation about this oral history about Bill Reel and 1996. You're freaking converting to the church. I'd like just to let's talk about Bill Reel's journey into Mormonism. Obviously, there must have been things about it that intrigued you. And tell us a little bit about yourself before becoming a Latter-day Saint. What your religious background and and what kind of environment you were raised in that prepped you for all of this.
Yeah, I've got one brother. We're 4 years apart. I have my mother's passed away, but my father's still living. My mother and father were great parents. I would say a bit emotionally unavailable, but really good to us. They took us to the things that we needed to go to. They created activities around camping or riding a bike or playing baseball in the yard or supporting us in our sports. Me and my brother were both big athletes in terms of playing sports, and he was really good. I wasn't, but we played a lot of stuff, and parents were really supportive of that. I don't have a childhood where I uh, have any real negative feelings about my growing up experience. And if I could go in a time machine and relive my childhood, I would love that. Uh, when I became a teenager around maybe the age of 16 or 17, I started working at a fast food restaurant. Met a girl there. She asked me on a date. Her family, they were LDS, ended up being my wife, who I'm now divorced from, but her family introduced me to the church. And the moment I heard about Mormonism, I got really excited. Like they tell you this story about a 14-year-old boy going into a grove of trees and asking which religion's true. And that seems so fascinating to me. And all I had was the church's narrative about that. And I wanted to know everything. So, first place I started was my school library. As you can imagine, they had very little there. So next, I went to the city library and I found Fawn Brody's "No Man Knows My
And just
History."
real quick, Bill, where did you grow up?
Sandusky, Ohio, near Cedar Point, the amusement park,
Okay.
northern Ohio, right on Lake Erie. A lot of my experiences in childhood were swimming in the lake, boating on the lake, fishing on the lake, tons of perch fishing and walleye fishing, lots of time spent on beaches on the lake. Really had kind of a cool childhood that had a lot of moments near the water or on the water. So,
Well, I'm a
um,
Midwest boy who grew up near the banks of Lake Michigan, so and
yeah.
kind of so similar backgrounds in that sense geographically. And thank you for sharing that. So yeah, of course, just being from the Midwest, there really isn't a whole lot out there about Mormonism. I tell people it was either the Jehovah's Witnesses or the for Hammond First Baptists, who are the people that knock on your door rather than the Mormons. So it's kind of interesting that and then often okay, so you fall for a girl, she's a Latter-day Saint, you're investigating Mormonism as a teenager, and you said you go and you check out Fawn Brody's "No Man Knows My History." Why don't you continue from there?
Yeah, so I'm investigating the church and I had really great experiences. I remember my first time at church. I had this really cool experience where I walk into Young Men's and they put the Godhead up on the three chalkboards, Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, Holy Ghost. And they're having a conversation about uh, who who each one is and why they're different from the other. And I never had any involvement in religion. And there was something about that made a lot of sense to me. It was almost like I already knew that if there was a Godhead, and again, I'm not framing it that way then. At the time, I'm like, if God's real, this is what I already knew it to be. Like they're separate. Um, and so I've had a lot of experiences early on in the church where you could call it the Holy Ghost, you could call it the Spirit, where I felt like, oh, like uh, there's something really interesting here, and I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it somewhere inside. I read the entire Book of Mormon before I got baptized. Again, I'm going to the library. I'm reading No Man Knows My History by Maven Brody. I'm encountering problems, and I'm encountering that there are things on the internet and there are other books that are trying to offer reconciliations. So I'm already, before I even get baptized, I'm already noticing this game of apologetics. I don't think it's a game at the time, but I see that other entities are raising problems, and Mormonism has its people who offer answers. Um, and so as I'm investigating, I go sit down with my future in-laws and I say, "Hey, I'm reading this book, No Man Knows My History by Maven Brody. She doesn't speak that good of Mormonism. She's pointing out lots of problems. What do you think about that?" And they didn't really have good answers. And because they didn't have good answers, I thought, does everybody in the church not have good answers, or are there good answers? And so it prompted me to like start reading more and more. I started going to college at Bowling Green State University, and they had a computer lab, and you could sit there all day long, print as much paper as you want, and like that was just included in your college tuition. And so I would spend hours in between classes in the computer lab looking up every problem. And you know how it is, Steve. If you're looking up Mormon history, one discovery of a problem and then you find an apologetic answer leads to another question. So now you find another problem and then you find another reconciliation. And before you know it, you've spent 6 months and you know that there's 5,000 problems in Mormonism, and they all have a defender of the faith offering some reconciliation.
Wow.
And so I felt like I got to know Mormonism really well, really fast. And so I read the whole Book of Mormon, prayed about it. I had at the time what I would call a visionary experience
Okay.
where I felt like the church, like something was telling me the church was true. And I had even perceived what I would call like a vision where at the top of the steps of my home, I was in the middle floor and I'm looking up at the top of the steps. My future wife is sitting next to me and we're talking about the word of wisdom, and alcohol and drugs and all that makes sense to me. But my dad was big into making sweet tea, and I loved his sweet tea. And it was a thing that like we had in our family, like my whole time growing up, there was always a pitcher of sweet tea in the refrigerator. And so I'm like, I get all the drugs and alcohol stuff, but coffee and tea, really? And at that moment, I sort of was stopped in my tracks by what I'll call a visionary experience. And I saw, like at the top of the steps in my mind's eye, my spiritual eyes, I saw like the future life of mine if I chose to join the church versus if I didn't. And I remember there being not an audible voice, like she didn't hear anything, but in my mind, there was a voice that I didn't think was mine that said, the church is true, all of it. In other words, quit fighting against it. It's all true. Um, and so that gave me the commitment to join the church. I felt like I got an answer to the Book of Mormon. I got an answer to the church is true. And I got baptized. And immediately they're throwing me into leadership positions. I started off as an assistant ward mission leader. When I'm released from that, it's so that I can be put in as the secretary of the elders quorum. When I'm released from that, it's so I can become the second counselor in the elders quorum. When I'm released from that, it's so I can become the elders quorum president. When I'm released from that, it's because they have put me in the young men's presidency as the second counselor. When I'm released from that, it's to be a counselor in the bishopric. And then after that, I'm immediately following, I'm released from that to be the bishop. And so I just moved from one leadership calling to the next. And so by the time I'm 29 years old, I'm the bishop of that ward. But at that point, I'm years in and I'm starting to recognize, like, oh, there are problems in the church. Let me say it differently. There are problems in the church that the church tells you people raise. For instance, a simple one is that critics say that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, while the Book of Mormon claims that Jesus was born in Jerusalem.
Hmm.
The church was telling me the criticisms that the critics were raising. And then it was telling me how silly those criticisms were. But
Mm.
over time, by the time I'm 29 years old, I know that those aren't the real problems of Mormonism, and that the real problems of Mormonism isn't telling you. They're not telling you that the Book of Abraham doesn't match the Egyptian papyri.
Right.
That you have to find separately. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
This makes sense, but I want to actually hit pause on this and I want to
Yeah.
continue this conversation, but I want to rewind a little bit
Please.
because you've said a lot of things that I really feel I want to dig into. So,
Mhm.
I'm thinking, during this period of time in the 1990s, this was the period of time that I was really throwing myself to study Mormonism as well. Now, I remember in high school, I was freaking, pre-internet times, I would check out the Encyclopedia of Mormonism series, like a volume at a time, and just read it cover to cover and just
Me
read it.
too.
So I spent a lot
Mhm.
of time really trying to understand it, truly fascinated by the thing. So here we are, we're in the 1990s. The internet is just getting started. I want to ask you, did you come across the God Makers? Did you come across the work of the Tanners? I want to know what materials you were dealing with, especially the critical part, because this is pre Bushman's Rough Stone Rolling. This is pre Fair Mormon being founded by our good friend, the Backyard Professor and company. This is really important to kind of talk about what information you had access to, because it wasn't at our fingertips like it used to be. You had the ability to get some of this information, obviously, in your college. I want you to talk about that process, that period of time, and what you had access to.
Yeah, so I've already named No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody.
Hmm.
I was purchasing tons of farms pamphlets from the church bookstore.
Okay.
Anytime I'd go to a baptismal trip or go to visit a church historical site, there'd always be a church bookstore nearby.
Right.
And I would always find myself gravitated towards apologetic type resources. So I wanted to know the doctrines, I wanted to know the theology, I wanted to know the problems. So the farms pamphlets, while they're uh, in some ways like Mormon biblical criticism, they're addressing a thing. The reason they're there is because there's a problem and they're trying to show you that that's not really a problem. So you're not really learning the problem with those, but you're getting the solution to the problem, which again tells my brain like, oh, like what are they responding to? Let me go find more out about that thing. There was a 4-book series called They Lie in Wait to Deceive, which was, I can't remember their names, but it was a husband and wife couple. They're believing Mormons, and they write in each of their books sort of a biography about all of the anti-Mormons: Ed Decker, the Cowdery guy, the Tanners, Walter Martin. And so they're explaining how these guys are all deceivers, they're all liars, their credentials are all false. By the way, I think there's some truth to that. Not all of them, but I think, for instance, like Walter Martin and Ed Decker at times manipulated people
Yep.
using false credentials, right?
Correct.
I also read the 4 volume set Encyclopedia of Mormonism. I have it up on my shelf. My ex-father-in-law owned that series, and I read it. He on his bookshelf had doctrines of salvations and answers to gospel questions. So I read a lot of stuff from Joseph Fielding Smith and a lot of stuff from Bruce R. McConkie. I, of course, read Bruce R. McConkie's Mormon Doctrine from front to back. I read the Encyclopedias of Mormonism, which I thought were so fascinating. When you said that, like to go page by page and read what Mormonism thinks about a thousand different
Yeah.
things was so enjoyable for me.
Mhm. Agreed.
And then again, very early internet, but the very first place I found myself was a site called New Jerusalem. And the main person on that site, again, I don't know who it was. Somebody out there knows. I'm sure Dan Peterson or Lou Midgley or somebody knows who it is. But he went under the pseudonymous name of Book of Mormon Answer Man. And he would let people, he was claiming that people were writing into him questions. Hey, what do you think of the Book of Abraham translation? And then he would go on and on about any one given issue. And so, really quickly, I could learn lots of things that were being raised as criticisms and what the standard apologetic answer was back then. Not the same as today. Again, for instance, Masonry and the endowment, the standard answer then was that this was a corrupted form of the endowment masonry. It went all the way back to the Temple of Solomon, and Joseph Smith was simply restoring it back to its perfect form. So I was in the early stages where I was accepting of bad answers, but by the time, again, later on, I'm well aware the bad answers don't work, and even their best answers aren't working anymore.
Right. Now, you're not saying this in the 90s, though. This is your analysis after the fact, right?
This is my, by the time I'm
By the
29 and
time you're
called to
29.
be a bishop, I'm compartmentalized. Like I know
Okay.
the church is true, but I've now spent practically what 10, 12 years learning that, oh, like again, I'll say the criticisms that the church tells you are being raised, the criticisms the apologist says are being made about the church, those aren't the real criticisms. And I'm now diving into bigger issues like the Book of Mormon translation or the Book of Abraham translation or the Kirtland Safety Society Bank, which are never the issues in the 90s that the church or anything close to the church is telling you is the issue.
Okay. And we're gonna
Yeah.
get to your 29th year, but
Yeah.
I really feel there's a few more things I want to kind of unpack in your past that was happening in the 90s. Um, of course, and it's interesting just for people to understand how within the evangelical world, we notice that the Mormonism, they often tend to copy a lot of what we do. So Book of Mormon Answer Man, was that what they were called? So that's obviously a play on the Bible
Bible.
answer
Mhm.
man, Hank Hanegraaff, who was the person who inherited Walter Martin's ministry after he had passed away. So it's often so fascinating to me to see the parallels between the evangelical world and Mormonism and how basically you guys often copy and emulate what we're doing. And that's interesting to me, just kind of want to address that. But I also wanted to say too is that again, a key thing here, Bill, and I actually, as somebody who deconstructed, was an atheist agnostic for 13 years, as a child experienced baptism in the Holy Spirit and spoke in tongues and had that type of experience. How do you, as somebody who's deconstructed, um, view those experiences, those spiritual, profound experiences that you had after reading the Book of Mormon, having that witness of the word of wisdom and the church being true? Um, how do you approach those spiritual experiences today? What lens are you
Yeah.
looking through there?
Yeah. Somewhere along the way, YouTube begins to be a thing. And there was a video that came out on YouTube, and you can still find it today. And I think the title of it is Can She Really Know? And it starts off with, I think, a Latter-day Saint, but it goes through a whole bunch of different religions and it shows believers in each system. And they're each telling you, like, I know my system is true. I prayed about my system, and God gave me a fantastic answer about my system. So I know God has reached out and touched me and told me that my system is the one true system. And I thought, and at the time, I was already thinking that in my head that, like, isn't it strange that no matter what system you're in, you have spiritual, if you're excited enough about your system, you will get spiritual answers that will testify to you that your system is the one true system. And then when I saw the video, I thought, oh, like that really hit home. Oh my goodness, that's what happens. It's not about Mormonism being true or the Muslim faith being true or the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism being true. It's that if you are passionate about your religious system and your religious system teaches you that you will feel and experience things that will tell you it's true, then you're going to have an experience. And it isn't unique to Mormonism, it's just elevation emotion. Now, I didn't have that word for it, that phrase, but now moving forward, Jonathan Haidt has explained clearly to us that all humans have those experiences and can be manipulated into having them if they think a situation's true and it really isn't. The Can She Really Know video you just put up there, uh, it goes through a bunch of religions and you can see those people all having really interesting experiences. So, on the one hand, I realized, like, oh, I'm not having an experience that makes Mormonism true. I'm just having a human experience. The other thing was that my answer to the Book of Mormon prayer that I gave ended up being a problem because the words I if any part of the experience is true, then this part of the experience is true, which is that a voice inside of me that wasn't mine said, "Bill, quit arguing with her about the word of wisdom. It's true, all of it." And I clearly understood when it said all of it, this voice inside of me, it was speaking about all of Mormonism and all the things that I had questions about that I was reading in the critical material and the apologetic answers I was hearing back. Fast forward, I know it's not all true.
Mm,
I know that even if Mormonism, in some crazy, absurd, can't figure out how it goes together way, is true, there are so many moments where things I had learned up to that point, even that leaders had stated, that leaders had assured me were the voice of God, that leaders had assured were the doctrines and theology, and they were true. Things had changed, been abandoned, been disavowed, that I knew it couldn't all be true. And so I knew that that answer wasn't some holy being out in the universe, some supernatural energy that was able to testify of an actual truth of all things. On some level, I had to make a decision that there was some deceiving myself inside, that the experience was created inside me and wasn't declaring some ultimate truth.
okay, so that's how you view it now. At the time
Yeah.
you didn't. For you, it
No.
must have been a real powerful moment, a
Hmm.
life-changing moment,
Hmm.
Damascus Road experience on some level. And now that you've deconstructed, you've kind of you've that and honestly too, for me, that was kind of my approach when I was an atheist, was the same thing. Like, okay, this is a very human experience. And how do I say that I always tell people, the problem I have with evangelicals is that basically, if you didn't have their particular salvation experience, then you're going to hell, unfortunately, is how they kind of viewed the world. But then to see people have truly remarkable, beautiful spiritual experiences outside of even a Western Christian framework calls into question everything for me. And I do think it's problematic for Christians to deal with that. And that's why some actually just completely move away from visionary experiences and just say, well, we just that doesn't even happen anymore because I think they realize the weakness of visionary experiences and how it can be very disruptive. And that's why you have Christian sects that are cessationists who don't even believe that God would speak to us that way. And that's how they've been able to grapple with it. But there's problems with that approach as well, which I've addressed in the past. And again, I'm talking as somebody who has returned back into faith, but completely honor and respect the process that you've gone through and see where you're coming from. Think it's really important to grapple with these things. Bill, so now let's talk about this 29-year-old that you keep on getting back to, because this is the key thing. Did you serve a mission?
Mm-mm.
Okay,
No mission.
because you got married, and I'm assuming that those kind of school and marriage and all. Okay, but at the age of 29, you're a bishop, which is that's pretty remarkable at that young of an age to get to that important of a position. But that's about the point where you kind of started questioning things. So I want to know what 29-year-old Bill Reel, what's going through his head at the time.
Yeah. One is that I had spent now, again, 12 years reading Mormon history and realizing, like, oh, the the defenders of the faith want you to see a certain angle of problems. They want you to see them from a surface level and they want you to only tackle them one by one. And when I dove deeper into those issues, I realized, like, the apologetic response, the standard one in the 90s, didn't work anymore. And so I knew the problems were more, they were more of a problem than I had anticipated. The other thing that was really big into me beginning to deconstruct my faith was that I had a former bishop in our ward. He wasn't the bishop before me, but he was the bishop before him. And by the time I'm bishop, he's in the stake presidency. Now, he was in my ward. I knew who this man was. And he was a really unhealthy human being. I watched him not do any of the work. So, just for instance, if we had an event in the cultural hall, when the event came to the end, you know how Mormons are. We all grabbed 10 chairs and put them away and we worked together. He would always find ways to make his way around the room, but he was never doing any of the work. He had a 0% home teaching. Again, there are good home teachers and bad home teachers in the ward. You can call it ministering if you want, but I grew up under home teaching. Um, he didn't do any home teaching. I'm the bishop. I go to a stake meeting where bishops are being trained, bishoprics are being trained. This man was given the responsibility to teach all of us about home teaching. And what he proceeded to do was shame everybody in the room. And while he's doing that, I'm smirking because my first counselor's with me and he's been in this ward forever. And I've been the bishop now for a year or two. And I'm smirking because I know he doesn't do his home teaching, and yet he is treating everyone else like crap. So when the meeting's over, he comes up to me and he goes, I saw you smirking. Let me guess, I know why you're doing it because I don't do my home teaching. And I said, yeah. I said, you just stood up there and told everybody how bad they were and how they needed to do it. And you haven't gone out in 5 years and done one home teaching appointment. Yet here you are in the stake presidency. And he proceeded to tell me it's not your job to put, I don't know what his words were, but the intention was it's not your job to push back against me. I'm in the stake presidency. I have stewardship over you. My job is to get these men to do the work of home teaching, and it's not your job to shine a light on anything I'm doing wrong. That was one moment. I had about a half dozen of moments with this man where I thought, oh, like he's kind of gross. He's kind of an icky person. He doesn't seem to operate based on healthy values and in a healthy inner world, and yet he has no problem fooling everybody and moving up to the top. Uh, and I
Hmm.
thought, isn't that interesting? That in
Unri it, un
Mormonism,
Unrighteous dominion, man. That's what that is.
yeah, what I learned was that you can be a really good Mormon and be a really not good person,
Mm,
and those two don't need to go hand in hand. And that caused me to start looking at leaders differently.
okay.
And then the moment you start looking at the things leaders say and why they say them and when they said them and the context around it, you start to realize that many, if not most, of the top 15 are deeply unhealthy as well. Again, I'll use it as an example. Elder Oaks denying that there was electroshock therapy at BYU, claiming that, well, there was, but claiming that by the time he got there, it had already been ended, when in reality, it had started under his tenure and existed the entire time he was there. Now, that's one thing. That could be just a memory issue. Then the Salt Lake Tribune says, wait a minute, Elder Oaks, this doesn't seem to be true. Would you like to address this? And someone like me, and I'm not a perfect person, I've made tons of mistakes, but a person like me in a situation like that, and I've had situations like that, it occurs to me inside that the best thing to do is to just be accountable and say, like, hey, you're right. Now looking into it further, I was there when it started. Because either he's lying or he's mistaken. If he's mistaken, it just makes sense to say, like, hey, I was mistaken. And I'm really sorry about that. But it appears that it did start under my tenure. I had forgotten. I wasn't as involved, whatever he wants to say. But instead, he's like, oh, we can't talk about that. And the moment I see a human being be confronted with something they've done and they want to get as far away from it as possible rather than be honest, I understand the game that's being played. And I saw that in Elder Holland along the way. I saw that in Quentin Cook. I've seen that in Elder Ballard. I've seen that in Elder Oaks, President Nelson, Gordon B. Hinckley, uh, President Monson to some extent, Bruce R. McConkie, Joseph Fielding Smith. I saw Hugh B. Brown compromise his integrity in order to go along with the group and keep the apostolic charge. When you look at the leaders of the church, there's a lot of bad behavior, dishonesty, obfuscation, and carefully wording things so as to manipulate the reader, the listener, the audience, that I recognize that these men aren't qualified to be my guide that my inner world is better at making decisions about right and wrong, ethics and morality than their ability to do so, and that I no longer should just give them the benefit of the doubt and give them my whole trust, but I would be better off trusting my intuition over what those men have to say. And so along the way, like that's also part of what plays into it. And again, going back to my list of four things, it really is the crux of my faith crisis. It was I couldn't trust leaders to be honest. Um, I couldn't trust leaders to know the truth. I couldn't trust them to tell the truth. I couldn't trust them to know the truth. There were so many things in Mormonism that were absurd and inconsistent. And there were so many things in Mormonism that they had uh, said was the truth, and they've since abandoned and disavowed. That table, all four legs were out, and the leaders, its history, its doctrine, and its ability to claim that it knows truth were all decimated. Um, and when you confront Mormonism that way, and you're willing to go like, what if it's not true? What if I was born into, or I got manipulated into a system and it's just not true? And so from 29, like I'm compartmentalized. Like I know the church is true, but there are these things I'm putting on the shelf one by one, day after day. By the time I'm towards the end of my time being bishop, so 34 years old, I served 4.5 years. By the time I'm 4.5 years in, I'm giving training sessions to the stake presidency and the other bishoprics in the stake. And they've asked me to teach them why people are losing faith over history, what a faith crisis is, what is really going on. And at the time, I've got Dieter Uchtdorf's, is it where he says like we've made mistakes. I've got Elder Holland giving a few talks where he's being a little more compassionate to the doubter. I've got the church, Richard Bushman and Marlon Jensen. I've got people in the church saying healthier things about faith crises and about why people leave. And I start to instruct the stake presidency and the bishoprics because I've been asked to do so. I'm not just running into a room and telling people they have to give me their time. I've been asked to do this. In doing so, you could tell right away there's a resistance. Like, no, I want to keep it the way I have it in my head. I don't really want this information. There was so much resistance. I was trying to make the church a better place. And what you find out is that if you try to make the church in a better place, put it the church in a better place by being direct, by saying like, look, we just can't treat people this way anymore. We can't frame doubts and losing your testimony this way anymore. We have got to start being uh, real about the reasons that people leave and the energy and capital they spend emotionally to try to figure it out, and they can't. We got to stop painting them as lazy. Again, the lazy learner thing hadn't come out yet, but we have this stigma in Mormonism that people are lazy, sinful, they just want to do bad things. And as you know, the Jeff Strong stuff that just came out, that is such a small segment of people who leave. I started to get this resistance. Like if I'm the guy who's going to raise my hand and go, "Hey guys, the Thomas Marsh story isn't true. The Simon's Ryder story, certainly, of all the things that were bothering Simon's Ryder, do we really think he left because his name was spelled wrong? Do we really think Thomas Marsh left in the middle of handling the Oliver Cowdery disciplinary court and being handpicked by Joseph Smith to be the judge in the issues with Cowdery and Fanny Alger? Do we really think Thomas Marsh left because some milk and some strippings? These stories aren't true. By the way, Mormonism, I assume, isn't going to teach those stories anymore either. It seems to have gotten away from a lot of those naive tellings. So again, leaders, history, doctrine. I don't trust the process of how leaders are chosen. Um, I don't see the church handling faith crises or doubt very well. Elder Oaks, it's wrong to criticize leaders, even if the criticism is true. Every system, if it's going to be good, has to allow the people not in authority to stand up to the people in authority and say, you're not treating us right here. And Mormonism doesn't let you do that. The only way you can exist in Mormonism addressing the issues in a relatively honest way is to give the benefit of the doubt to the leaders in every instance. You cannot stand up and say that these guys have lied, that these guys don't always tell the truth, that these guys have unhealthy egos and are always trying to get away from talking directly about problems. If you do that, you'll be punished. They won't let you stay and say those things. So you have to couch it in ways that Patrick Mason or Terrell Givens or Jim Bennett, you have to couch it the way those men do. You can't be stern and say, no, Elder Oaks, you lied. That's unacceptable. You have got to be accountable about your answers about things like the electroshock therapy. So I just became uber disappointed that nothing in Mormonism added up. Yeah, anyway.
Okay, so I think this is really cool, and I'm so glad you're sharing this with us. But I want to clarify here, just an understanding. So you're 29 years old, and right around that time is when you had that conference or that conversation with the stake president. Okay, so would you say your deconstruction really kind of started or began with seeing how the kind of people were in leadership positions in the church? Would that be correct?
Yes, but it's everything. It's not just that. And again, it's all little baby steps. It's
So,
hard to say, like at 31, this happened, and at
okay.
33, this happened. But by the time I'm 29, I've spent 12 years learning how to address the problems in a way that maintained faith. And from
Mhm.
about the age of 29 forward, I'm now realizing that those answers don't actually work. And I have a growing weight on a shelf that is clear that these answers don't address the problem. And I'm becoming disillusioned with the character of leaders, both local and general.
Mhm.
And it just ends up being a tidal wave of things that you can't work around anymore.
It's interesting. So we have this accumulation of all these issues and doubts that you have. You see what's happening in practice with how things are with just the bureaucracy and how the church actually operates. But we also have, Bill Reel, the spiritual person who believes in God during this period of time too, right? So spiritually, where were you at? Like this to think of the struggle of being a believer and then seeing how in your mind messy things are, whether it's the history, whether maybe it's some of the theology, whether it's how the church is structured. So what is Bill Reel, the believer, thinking at this time?
Yeah, I wanted nothing more than Mormonism to be true, and my life would have more, again, at the time, my life would have more purpose and meaning if my brain could figure out how to hold that position. So it tried to. In 2012, I was born in 78. So if somebody wants to try to help me keep the math straight, they can do the math for me. But I was born in 78. By 2012, I had started to listen to Mormon stories,
Okay.
and I had really enjoyed John Dehlin's conversations with Richard Bushman, Terrell Givens,
Mhm.
Brant Gardner.
Yep.
Uh, and when I heard those conversations, they were these conversations where the depth of all of this messiness was being talked about in a way that you could not get in a local ward congregation. And but there were things I was reading about and thinking about, seer stones and papyri and all the various things in Mormonism.
Okay.
And so for John Dehlin to sit down and talk to these men who are in the church and to say, hey, here's what people are asking real questions about. It's not whether Jesus was born in Bethlehem or Jerusalem. That's nonsense. That's a distraction that Mormonism utilized to make you think that the critic was either deceitful or ignorant. And they didn't want me to know the real questions. So as John's asking Bushman and Givens and Brant Gardner, I'm hearing the conversations that I wanted to hear
Mm.
that were not available anywhere else.
Hmm.
But I also noticed that John was coming to these questions and these interviews as one who was deconstructing and losing faith, right? And I didn't want to lose faith. I wanted to
Right.
hold it. And I thought, could could somebody have the exact same conversations John's having, but have them with a more faithful, believing mindset? And so I started it in 2012. And if you go back to the first year, two, three, four that I did the work,
Hmm.
my conversations always gave I asked the tough questions, but when they gave their best response, I allowed it to sit there. I didn't challenge it with the next logical question. And so I gave this space where both criticism and doubt could exist, but also belief and faith could also be present
Okay.
because that's who I was. I had this half of my brain that was like, this
All
doesn't
right.
add up. And the other half of my brain says, you've had spiritual experiences. The
Okay.
church is true.
Wow.
Um,
Okay, I think this is really important to talk about this because, I tell people too, we are hardwired spiritual animals. That's what gave us, I think, an evolutionary advantage, and that's why we're here. And I think it's important to acknowledge that spiritual aspect. Bill, so often, living in a very materialistic world, we forget the spiritual side of humanity, and that also that inner struggle that you're going through at this time. And I actually want to actually have you talk about deciding to start your podcast and everything like that. And I just want to kind of give some context here too. So this is early days. Back in, let's say, late aughts, we have this guy named Sean McCraney of Heart of the Matter, who was doing his really a trailblazer, right? He was doing live streams on YouTube and on television way before everybody else. So I get into the orbit of Sean McCraney. And at this time, I'm atheist, okay? And I'm really interested in Sean. And the next thing you know, I come across this guy who interviews Sean McCraney circa 2010 named John Dehlin. So that's when he first came on my radar screen. So again, these are early days where YouTube was just starting to become a thing. Podcasts were getting established, but still early days. And
Most of us
so
didn't know how to use the internet then. Nobody
yeah,
even knew how to accumulate information on the internet yet.
correct, correct. So this is again, it's important for us to talk about these things so we understand what that world looked like and felt like. And of course, in 2005, John Dehlin's walking and he hears a voice to say, start a podcast when most people didn't even know what a podcast was. Again, I think we need to acknowledge that kind of spiritual aspect that John was having at the start of his channel as a believer. Okay, so now we fast forward to 2010. John Dehlin's on my radar. I start engaging his materials, and then circa 2012. What made you decide to start a podcast? Like, and what was your intention? What at that time was this as much about your journey as anything that you were experiencing, and you wanted to do some like talk therapy, or how did you approach starting this, and why did you do it?
Yeah. So as I'm listening to Dehlin and noticing that he's having that more critical point of view, I reach out to him and I send John an email. And John, by the way, in my most recent sit down with him a few years ago, he went through those emails. He had held on to them. And so he was reading them to me, and I hadn't seen them in a long time. But I sent him emails and said, "Hey, John, like, could you be more uh non-slanted towards the critical side? Could you just be neutral? Like, please, I need you to be neutral. Would you be willing to do that? I'm a sitting bishop. I have these questions too. I find this history fascinating. Is there any chance that going forward you could talk to people?" Because I just listened to the Brant Gardner interview and he had come out really intense pushing back against Brant in that conversation. And he was more neutral with Givens and more neutral with Richard Bushman. And I could see John was getting more frustrated with the problems not really being answered when he asked the questions. And so he reached back out to me and said, "You're a sitting bishop? Ding, ding, ding. Like, let's sit down with a sitting bishop. That's great for Mormon stories." And so I sat down with him for the very first time, I think in 2012. Folks can go online and find what the date of that was. And I think I handled the conversation from a believing perspective. I handled the conversation really well. He asked all the things, and I felt like I was holding my own, which communicated to me, like, oh, you could be competent in this space. So when that interview ended, I shared it with some friends, some people from the ward, and I got tons of positive feedback that The way I handled those questions was really good. I held my own. I didn't get stumped. Um, and so I said, this can't be that difficult. I ended up getting an account on Podbean, which was free. That was the reason I did it. I mean, you could go do it your own way, but you had to kind of figure out how to design all these things. Whereas Podbean, you just upload the audio, it was free. And as you built a subscriber base, a cost would incur when you needed to increase the space that you were utilizing and the people that were following. And I went over to Walmart. I bought a Logitech headset with a microphone, and I started recording episodes. And if you go back to the early episodes, what I was most fascinated by was the view of grace that Stephen Robinson, Brad Wilcox, Robert Millett were proposing, and how different that was from the Mormon version of grace. And my inner world felt so attracted to the Wilcox Robinson Millet version that I started doing a deep dive on MP3 files of all their talks dealing with that. I went out and read Believing Christ by Stephen Robinson, Brad Wilcox's first talk about the piano and how we're just trying to practice playing the piano was deeply moving to me. And then Millet comes in and backs up some of that theology with some of the same ideas. And I just knew that Mormonism's grace was too abrasive. By the way, Mormonism today agrees because Mormonism has changed and softened its view of grace. So
Absolutely.
I was ahead of the curve.
Yep.
Wilcox was ahead of the curve. Millet was ahead of the curve. Stephen Robinson was ahead of the curve,
Mhm.
not prophets, seers, and revelators, by the way. Uchtdorf eventually gave a conference talk after all of that and essentially took Brad Wilcox's ideas and just re-articulated them in a general conference.
And again, too,
Um,
Bill, just so we understand the context too, this is the result of my community, the evangelicals, having conversations with Latter-day Saints, including Millet, and engaging them about grace and really what it's all about. And that's led to a fundamental shift. So again, let's also acknowledge the external influences from my community that's also happening at this time too, that's causing these conversations to happen in your church as well. And so for you, so you're really glomming onto this idea, this kind of Protestant evangelical idea of grace is really resonated with you at that time.
yeah, in fact, if you go back to that book I wrote, The Mighty Change on
Mhm.
Amazon, the whole thing of that was to take Millet, Wilcox, Robinson, juxtapose it against some of the things Mormonism was saying and trying to suggest that, hey, we in Mormonism haven't developed this theology accurately enough and fully enough. And so when Mormonism said you needed to be justified and sanctified, that you needed to be made clean and changed, right? I wanted to play with those ideas. And I think so. I think that book, The Mighty Change, for me was a really fun time to spend developing in my own head my Mormon theology around grace and works and the mighty change that's spoken of in the Book of Mormon and trying to put it all together. And so my early episodes were trying to share those ideas, which led to me somewhere early on reaching out to Brad Wilcox and getting an interview with him. And so I interviewed Brad Wilcox. It was a two-parter. It lasted like I think 2 or 3 hours, and we had a great conversation. But then I knew, like, oh, you just have to reach out to these people and they'll say yes, and then you have a conversation. And so I ended up often just recycling whoever John had interviewed, but doing it from a more faithful perspective. And then anytime I would read an interesting book or see an interesting topic in Mormonism,
Huh.
I just went and tried to find the person who was talking about that issue and have them on and have a conversation. And I found that people really enjoyed that. They also
Hmm.
wanted to explore these deeper issues within history. And so the podcast for the first 4 years was a really faithful podcast. It always ended trying to get people to go like, hey, it's messy. It's not your fault that it's messy. I know other entities in this space are blaming you for not having read enough or not having questioned enough or not having learned enough. The reality is it's not your fault. The church has not been transparent And it has been quite confusing on a plethora of topics. But at the end of the day, let's try to figure out the best way to work around these issues in a way that maintains faith, because that's what I wanted. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know what year it was, you could easily look it up, but I did an episode titled Our Bad Days.
Okay.
And that's the first moment where in my head I had severe doubts, but I always articulated my position faithfully. I always assumed that in the end, the church was true, and that no matter how much these issues look like they're problems, there has to be a solution at some point that I'll figure out the workaround that gets me back to like knowing the church is true completely and not having these doubts on the other side of my head.
Okay, so this is the process during these first few years that you're acknowledging the issues, but you're still framing it through a faithful perspective. This is how I can still hold on to faith. This is why I believe it's true, even with all these doubts. And you're saying, what was the name of that episode again? Our Bad Days?
Our Bad Days. Now there's an Our Bad Days part 2 as well, but Our Bad Days the original.
Okay, so when you decided to do that podcast, what was
Mhm.
the intent? What was Our Bad Days? What was that referring to?
It was telling the audience that while I frame everything faithfully, there's another side of my head that has put tons of things on the shelf and is frustrated and sad that the issues in Mormonism don't work out as cleanly as I wish they did.
Okay, so this is the first time you express this to your audience, correct?
This is the first time that I'm sharing with them both sides of my compartmentalized brain.
Okay, so they're seeing the whole bill reel finally at this point. Okay,
Yeah,
so when you did this, and because I think it's really important, it's one thing to say, okay, I want to do this, and then there's the process of actually doing it
I
and
was scared.
saying it. Okay, so you
Yeah.
you approach this episode in your and so was this just Bill Reel just talking and just
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah. Yep.
and so you go into this again before you hit record, you're scared, you're
I'm
worried.
afraid. I'm afraid that if I tell my truth, that the listeners want so badly to only be given the workaround, the faithful perspective, that they'll step away from listening. They will disengage or they'll criticize me for being all those things that we're trained to see doubters as.
Okay. So in other words, what you're afraid of is that now they will view you in a negative lens and they will no longer listen to you because they can put you into that box of he's an apostate or he's whatever. Okay.
Yeah, but the opposite happened.
See, and I think that's key. And I didn't know what the response was. So I think this is important to explore this. So you put it out there, you pour out your heart, you reveal the full bill reel, doubts and all, warts and all. You express to your audience for the first time. Talk about the feedback you got.
It was overwhelmed. I don't even remember if I got one negative comment. It was the show up to that point that I got the most feedback about. I don't know what it was, but let's say I got 100 responses.
Okay.
And all of them were people saying, like, I feel that too. No one has ever
Okay.
articulated that out loud. You made me feel like I wasn't alone. You let me know
Okay.
that this isn't my fault. The response was so incredibly positive
Hmm.
that it was one of these big moments in my journey where I realized, like, oh, if you're honest and vulnerable,
Yep.
you'll actually connect with your audience in ways that are the opposite of what your fears, that part of you that's scared to death of being exposed. Um, that part is trying to keep you so far away from vulnerability, but vulnerability is actually the way to connect with your audience. And if because they're experiencing the exact same thing you are.
Yeah.
Again, don't get me wrong, Steve. There are Mormons, believing Mormons out there that no matter what information they encounter, they're just always going to believe and they're going to work around it. And they're going to criticize people like me and say stories about what my motives are, what my intentions are, how uninformed I am. But the far and wide majority of people just want an open, honest conversation where these issues are explored and it's stated to them like you're not alone. this is a really difficult thing to go through a faith crisis. And the more we can all just acknowledge how hard this is and deal with the issues honestly, the better off we're going to be. And so that was like this moment where from there forward, you can see the trajectory starts to go the other direction, which is I'm going to keep being honest. I'm going to keep being vulnerable. As we encounter problems, if there aren't good answers, we're just going to acknowledge there aren't good answers. And from that point, you can start to see uh, me being less and less tolerant of what I'll call the apologetic BS.
Okay. So now I want to kind of, what time frame is this? Is this circa 2014, 2015 by your reckoning?
I'm just going to look it up real quick. Our Bad Days and type in Mormon Discussion. By the way, on my website, I do have a archive, so you can go in there. Um, let's see here. Episode Our Bad Days, episode 113. This was December 4th of 2014.
Okay. So I think this is key just to document this because this is before John Dehlin is excommunicated from the church. Okay, so John, so again, because I was wondering to know if that was playing a role in your thought process as well. But you, at this point, this John was causing enough controversy that probably people saw the writing on the wall that he was going to probably be excommunicated sooner than later. Was that a factor too for you? That maybe me being honest with my audience might actually get me excommunicated from the church?
Oh, I think, yeah, there's no ifs, ands, or buts that I'm aware that again, no one's told me the line,
Right.
but my brain notices there is a line.
Hmm.
You are either an ally to the church or you're an enemy to the church. And the moment you cross a line, and I didn't know exactly where that line was, but I knew that you are pressured explicitly and implicitly by the system that there's a line. Be careful. Don't get too close to it. You're better off staying far away from that line. And if you cross that line, your church membership comes to an end.
Okay, so I want to know, so you go on Mormon Stories in 2012. You are a sitting bishop at the time. Is that correct? Okay, and
Yep.
you started your podcast in 2012 as well?
In 2012. And I
Okay.
also in 2012, I believe I was recruited. His name slipped me for a minute, but Steve from Fair Mormon, I forget what his last name is. John Lynch, Scott Gordon was the president. John
Yeah.
Lynch was like the vice president, and then Steve something was sort of the guy who did all the mediating with all the other folks. And so Steve reached out to me, said, "I heard your interview on Mormon Stories.
Okay.
I thought you handled that so great.
Oh,
I like a lot of the content you're putting out. Is there any chance you'd like to work with us and produce podcast episodes for us?" So in 2013, I was 90% of the podcast content that Fair Mormon produced that year.
okay.
And when it went to the podcast awards in Las Vegas, Fair Mormon won in 2013 the religious category.
Wow.
You can, somewhere I still have the audio of this, but you can hear the Fair Mormon representative go up and he thanks me and some of the others who contributed. All that content's gone today. Fair Mormon has removed all of it. But in 2013, I was the creator of
Wow.
90% of their content, and we won the podcast awards that year.
So you have your own podcast and you're
Mhm.
doing podcasts for Fair Mormon.
I'm a lot of my work was duplicated. So for instance,
Okay.
um, I would interview Janet Eyring, for instance, is one that comes to mind. There was also a McConkie that was writing books at the time too, not Thomas McConkie, but another McConkie. Uh, and he wrote something, and I interviewed him. And then some of my monologues and some of my interviews, maybe 20 episodes or so, maybe something every other week during the course of a year. Uh, I was producing content that I would put in both locations.
Oh,
And I
wow.
remember Steve, again, I forget his last name, but I remember Steve coming to me and saying some of our Fair Mormon members are talking behind the scenes, criticizing you. One, because you're duplicating content in both places. And my response to Steve is like, I'm one person. I can't do for both. And I'm definitely not just going to create for you because my brain knew at some point, if I keep pushing, these guys aren't going to want to use me anymore. For me to give up my own work and produce solely for them, that didn't make any sense. And so I'm going to keep producing content for me. And if the content is appropriate to be placed on Fair Mormon's podcast channel, then I would duplicate it over there. The feedback on the episodes was great. The people listening to the content loved it. But again, I'm having out loud, I'm sort of just little by little pushing up against where the lines are in Mormonism. And my conversations are acknowledging to the Fair Mormon audience, like these are real problems and we don't have great answers for some of these things. So I think that began to sort of irritate them on that side.
Okay, so this is 2013, 2014 that this is happening?
2013 is when we won the
Won the
podcast
award,
awards.
right?
Probably somewhere, probably in the beginning of 2014 is when I start to have a falling out with Fair. And again,
Start,
I don't know
okay.
the exact dates, but it's somewhere around there.
Okay, and so were you on the payroll of Fair Mormon at this time?
No, no, everything is volunteer. The only person paid in Fair Mormon at the time, I don't know about today, they have millions of dollars, I think, now, whereas they didn't have as much then. But at the time, the only person that was paid in the Fair Mormon organization, according to the top leaders in Fair, was the part-time manager of the bookstore. Everybody else was volunteer. So I was volunteer as well. I not only produced content for them, but I was also part of this large group of Fair Mormon members who, when people would go onto the Fair website and type out, like, I have a question. I just read today that the Egyptian papyri isn't the Book of Abraham. Help
Yep.
me. And that question then gets sent to all of us behind the
Yes.
scenes. And then we can each, and anybody who feels motivated is allowed to answer questions. They also began to get frustrated because I would write the person and say, we actually don't really have great answers.
Mm,
And they didn't want you doing that. Like, you were not allowed to acknowledge that the questions don't have good answers. You just had to give the best available faithful answer and treat it as if it solves the problem. And that led to a lot of conversation where, and I don't even know if the Fair Mormon folks knew it, but they're blaming the member for having the question. They're blaming them for not knowing that Joseph Fielding Smith
I see.
contradicted himself. And that didn't feel right to me. So there were these moments behind the scenes where I'm telling them to stop performing a character assassination on people like John Dehlin. I'm writing people who have questions, and
Mm,
I'm making sure that of all the things, I'm not blaming them, that they came to this doubt honestly, they came to this problem honestly, and it's not their fault. And I'm acknowledging that these problems don't have good answers. And so sometime early in 2014, Steve, again, don't know, Steve reaches out to me and says, "Hey Bill, like, you got to stop doing these things. You can't be here and answer the questions this way." By the way, there's another person in our space that maybe you know, maybe you don't. He hasn't really interacted with Mormonism in quite a few years, but there was a guy by the name of John Westover, and folks can find him on Facebook or on LinkedIn. John was serving on Fair Mormon with me, and him and I were having these conversations with Fair's leadership at the same time and
mhm.
talking to each other about, isn't it, it seems unhealthy to not be more honest and transparent about the problems and to make the doubter feel like it's their fault. So
Yeah,
he can vouch for all of this that I'm
sure.
saying.
Well, now, was Nathan Smith, the teenager, was he engaged in that group? I think that's about the time that Nathan Smith was involved in the group too. I don't know if you're aware of him, if that rings a bell.
I'm
Uh,
not aware of Nate. There were a couple of other Smiths. One of them is like the second cousin of Elder Holland.
okay. So yeah,
But
I had Nathan on early days on my podcast to talk about being a teenage fair Mormon apologist who's since deconstructed. But okay, so and again too, that's also, I know I've talked to a lot of people who were involved in those conversations. That was really important. And again, to have somebody come in and ask a question and then be criticized for and being attacked for asking the question, probably not the most healthy approach. And hopefully they moved away from that. I also want to say that per a conversation I had with Scott Gordon about a year and a half ago. And by the way, Scott, you're invited to come on anytime to give an oral history of Fair Mormon like I've done with other people, including Backyard Professor. According to Scott, I think they still only have one person employed for Fair Mormon just as of a year and a half ago. So I just wanted to kind of say that, they're, I'm actually surprised at how small of an operation they are. And Mormonism Research Ministry, the Evangelical group, is actually larger than them. I think they have a larger budget than Fair Mormon, which is astonishing to me, considering that Fair Mormon certainly has had a much bigger impact in this space than MRM will ever have, even though they probably have more resources. Just that's a little side quest I'm going to go take you there. Okay, so it's 2014. And so now that you are starting to have your falling out with Fair Mormon, they're not liking some of the stuff that you're doing in the podcast. They're not liking some of the answers that you're given. And now you're grappling, Bill Real, still believer, like we want to keep this a safe space for the people in the church. We want to give them authentic answers. There's a real conflict brewing here, dude. And so explain the evolution of those conversations early 14 to then you deciding to do that episode. What were you, did it just kind of naturally evolve from all of this, or was there a point where you said, I got to do this episode?
Yeah, it was such a slow, incremental process. It's really hard to step back into any given moment, but I'll say this. As I'm trying to help local, regional stake, ward and stake leaders and members stop blaming the doubter, start to be more honest, open, transparent about our history, try to help leaders engage people with questions in a healthier way. I keep meeting resistance. Um, it becomes clear to me, again, my motive inside my head at the time is I I know that the leaders are acting in ways that my moral compass says is not the right way to deal with people who have doubts and to deal with the problems in our history, not to run from it, hide it, carefully word it, uh, refuse to talk about it. I knew those weren't healthy ways of being human around other humans having faith crises. And so my goal was like, I'm going to push for openness. I'm going to push for transparency. When I was a bishop, I started assigning talks with the gospel topic essays and sacrament meeting. I wanted these things talked about out loud because if we go like, no, if you can't talk about that, that tells me like that's not the issue's problem. That's not the doubter's problem. That's the leader's discomfort with where the issue goes and with what might happen to the doubter if we keep validating that these are real problems. Um, and I wasn't going to let the leader get away from that. So anytime I had a chance, both as a bishop and then afterward as a ward mission leader, in my interactions with stake leaders, putting on presentations for them, anytime I went and did a fireside to talk openly and honestly with doubters, I had several moments where I wrote church leaders. I had conversations personally with Elder Holland and Marlon Jensen. My whole goal was the era of us pretending these problems aren't real and distancing the believer from them is not appropriate and we have to change. But that tension isn't safe in Mormonism. So I can just sense that I'm being ostracized. I'll give examples. Um, Now I have stake leaders, stake presidents in Ohio. And then when I moved to Utah in 2015, I have stake presidents reaching out to me and telling me that the church has asked them to sit down with me and to talk to me about the content and the things I'm saying publicly. So I can sense the church is starting to get uncomfortable with me being open and honest about Mormon history and the problems therein. When I would sit down with those stake presidents, it was soft at first. It would be, we're not really asking you to change. We just want you to know that the brethren are aware and, they would like you to be really careful of what you say. And, it's my job to check. They've asked me to check in on you every couple of months and just see how things are going and see if there's anything that, we can do to help keep this, on the right side of things and going the right direction. So I knew I was making them nervous. I sensed that when I would raise my hand in Sunday school and something would be said that's coming from an old manual that's now long and gone, uh, but at the time was current, when I would raise my hand and say, "Hey, that's not accurate," I started to get resistance, especially when I moved here in Utah in 2015. I start to get people in my ward who are like, "We don't like when you say things. We don't like when you talk. When you say things, you take the stories that we've been told and you're conveying to us that there are problems with them." Well, there are problems with them. And that is not a space for honest, open conversation. And so I started to get resistance from, a Sunday school teacher or a priesthood leader. Um, People had a sense of distrust uh, because I'm telling them a Mormonism that they've never had to deal with before.
Okay, so I want to know, what was your motivation to move to Utah in 2015?
Yeah. So in 2014, late in the year, maybe November, a couple of listeners to my podcast, they were brothers, Chris and Clay Bloxam, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, we really love your podcast. Is there any chance you'd come to Nevada near Las Vegas and put on a presentation?" So in 2014, they flew me out to Vegas, showed me a good time. We hung out at the casino, playing craps and roulette for a minute. They took me to breakfast, and Chris took me to like the nicest breakfast buffet in Vegas, and we sat and had great conversations. Um, we just had a really good time. We go to Henderson, Nevada, and there is a fireside that Clay Bloxam put on in his backyard, and it gets catered, and like 50 or so people show up. Got chairs in the backyard. Everybody's sitting. I come out at 6 p.m. They do the dinner. 7 p.m. I walk to the front, and Clay introduces me, and I take on for the next 3 to 4 hours every question anybody in the crowd had. And these were all doubters. These were all
Okay.
people who had significant questions about Mormonism. Um, and I take every question: Book of Abraham, Book of Mormon translation, 19th century material, this, that, and the other thing. And I felt like I handled it really well. Uh, I think everybody walked away going like, he validated me. He offered me solutions if that's what I wanted. If I wanted to keep believing, he gave me ways to do that.
Okay.
And if I can't believe this anymore, he honored that that's a real conclusion to come to.
Hmm.
And when that was all done, Clay's brother Chris, who lives in southern Utah, him and his wife Dawn own the family ponds in southern Utah. He says, "Bill, you were amazing at that. Like your ability to connect with people, be honest with them, validate them, uh, carry out a complex conversation so that they understood the issue and got walked through it in a way that they weren't confused. I need people like that to work for my company. Any chance you'd consider moving to Utah?" And so my ex and I, my wife at the time, uh, we had conversations that night when we went to bed and said, what would it take? Here's what I'm making in Ohio. What would it take for me to uproot our family and to move here? And we came up with a number. And in the morning, I shared that with Chris, and he said, "Great." He said, "How about, when you go home, let's carry on the conversation and then let's bring you back out for like a little trial run." So then they flew me back into Vegas, drove me to Southern Utah, and I spent just 3 days working at the pawn shop. Hated it, uh, but the increase in pay was the only chance I'd had up to that point for me and my family to get out of what I'll call poverty. I was making 35 grand a year, and my ex was a stay-at-home mom for the most part. She was working part-time doing some
Okay.
things.
Okay.
We didn't have much money, and we're paying a full tithe, and we barely were getting by. And so this was enough of an increase in pay that I could see a possibility to finally start enjoying life a little bit. And
Mhm.
so we decided to move our family, took the job, moved our family to southern Utah. And then I found I actually really loved the job and spent 7 years managing the pawn shop in Hurricane, Utah. The pawn business is one of the coolest, most interesting businesses in the world. You have people buying, you have people selling, you have good people looking for an engagement ring, you have lifelong thieves walking in trying to sell stolen goods. And it was one of these in my past job, I was a floor covering salesman, and
Okay.
it really allowed you to just turn your brain off and be really good at the job, except every once in a while you had to have your brain on, and my brain either needs to be off or on. If I'm just on an assembly line putting parts together, I'll turn my brain off and just do the rote thing. But if the job requires my brain to be on, then it's on. And the pawn shop requires your brain to be on all the time.
Okay.
And I found that I was really good at it. So they told me that within a year, I would hopefully progress enough to be able to manage this store in Hurricane, Utah. And before 6 months were over, they're like, You got it. You're better. You understand the complexity of this business better than people who have been here for years and years. We're going to throw you into the Hurricane store and you're going to run it. You're going to manage it. And our store's numbers went up,
Okay.
and Chris and Dawn seemed like they were quite happy with how that was all going. And so for the next 7 years, I ran the pawn shop. Eventually, the podcast grew so substantially that I was able, as the executive director of the nonprofit, to be able to begin receiving a salary myself and to begin paying Radio Free Mormon a significant salary, and for us to be able to start to work towards doing this full time.
Okay.
So at that point, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I stepped away from the pawn shop and now do this full time.
So
Uh,
did they offer you that job because they said, "Well, I want to work a guy like you working for my company," but there was also an understanding like we want to help you to be able to do your job, but also help this enables you to do your podcast as well. So was there an understanding that they would work with you and your schedule with doing podcasts and stuff like that?
yeah, this deserves mention. Thanks for asking that. Chris and Dawn were amazing. His brother Clay and Heather were amazing too. They lived in Nevada, just outside of Vegas and Henderson. Uh, Chris and Dawn lived here in St. George, but Chris and Dawn put their arms around our family, treated us like their best friends, and helped us make that move so easy. Um, One of the things that when I was in Vegas for that presentation, we walked around. They showed us Las Vegas. That was their home, you know. So they took us around downtown Las Vegas. We went and saw the fountains at the Bellagio and the volcano out in front of one of the casinos, the hotels, did all that. But the whole time we're out there, we're talking Mormonism, bouncing messy, you know, Albert Carrington and Richard Lyman, and we're having these conversations where it's clear to me that these four, Chris and Dawn and Clay and Heather, that they know Mormonism as well as anybody I've ever run into, and they were thinking the same thing, like you know Mormonism as well as anybody we run into. And so as we're having all these fun conversations, Chris, the owner of the family ponds, and he would say as much. He noted like it would be so helpful to me to have a friend in southern Utah who knows this stuff well as our family's going through deconstruction. Our family's going through a faith crisis. We're trying to figure out how to navigate this. And so not only am I working at the pawn shop, but him and I are having conversations essentially every day that are validating each other that this faith transition is really hard, that there's so many messy issues, and who else can I process these issues with than to talk to this other person who knows Mormonism as well as I do and no one else does. So it felt like every day we were having uh, like supportive conversations with each other about faith transition, about the deconstruction of this faith. Um, so they gave me plenty of room to work on the podcast, to grow the podcast. Chris told me early on, he said, Bill, there's going to be a day where if you keep doing this and it keeps growing the way it does, you're not going to need to work here anymore. And you don't need to feel bad about that at all. He always made it easy that when the time came, I was not going to feel any feelings of shame or judgment from him, that he was, if anything, he was my biggest fan, and their family were so supportive of ours and wanting us to be nothing but successful.
Okay,
Yeah.
I love this, Bill, and I really appreciate your frankness here. So you would say at this time, and again, it's interesting because November you get offered the job in 2014. You do your pivotal episode in December. So I guess even on a subconscious level, I think you recognize that you're going to be entering the Mormon corridor. I think you must have thought this is the perfect time to really kind of be the real Bill Real, kind of come out so that you can be your authentic self and be able to do that. Is that kind of what was another motivation going on too?
No, so I don't move. I go to the presentation in 2014. There's talk about moving, but there's no hard game plan
Okay.
until I'm flown out there in early 2015
Okay.
in order to sort of test the business. And then another maybe month go. Yeah, no, no, no. I'm saying that wrong. When I drove back with them to the airport, they offered me the position after the 3-day trial. Said we'll start you on our payroll right now. You go home, put in your last 2 weeks, and then feel free to move out here, and we'll start having you work. And I went back home. The next day, I showed up at my floor covering job, informed them that I was putting my 2 week notice in, and my boss said, "You don't need to worry about 2 weeks. Pack your box up and get out." Uh, and he was really rude about it, but so be it. I packed my box up, moved out, went home immediately, packed all of my things. Uh, my ex at the time and my kids were like, "Hey, we'll stay behind another month, try to get things in order." We ended up renting the house out to a family member, and so I moved to southern Utah. I packed up some tuna fish and crackers, little things, packed up all my clothes, and drove the 24-hour drive in my Hyundai Accent from Sandusky, Ohio to Utah in about 30 hours. I took a little 6-hour nap in a rest stop somewhere along the way, and then went to them, stayed with them for a few weeks, then ended up staying with a friend who was a friend in Ohio who had also moved to southern Utah, stayed with their family for a couple of weeks, and by then my family made their way down. But there wasn't any connection in the 2014 Our Bad Days
Okay.
that I was going to be moving to Utah. Like the presentation had happened, there was conversation about it, but it was as unsure as anything. Um, so yeah, it was just me. And again, if folks go back in time, it's just me having these little incremental shifts along
Right.
the way of a journey of life.
Well, and I think it's important because you were talking to your friends there in Nevada and you were talking about the transition, deconstruction. How would you have described yourself? What kind of Mormon were you at that point? Would you have categorized yourself maybe as a progressive Mormon, or you're going through a process of deconstruction? What kind of Mormon would you have described yourself at that point?
Uh, I would have probably been in the mold of like a Patrick Mason
Okay.
way of articulating ideas, compassion towards the doubter, wanting to be honest about church history, but also wanting to walk the line so that the church saw me as not an enemy. Um, that's
Mhm.
how I think I would perceive myself as people would have if people would have interacted me in that moment, they would have saw me in the same light that they see Patrick Mason articulating things.
Okay, this is really important to see how you saw yourself at that time as you enter into the Mormon corridor and start expanding your podcast as you're also getting expanded income and you're starting to be able to live probably a different lifestyle as well. And so as you're having these engagements and you're doing these interviews, and this is circa right around the time that you would have probably been interacting with RFM, right? Is this?
Yeah, he comes on board late 2015, early 2016.
Mhm.
And I had had a conversation with him on a top, a gospel topic that there was a lot of controversy around. And so him and I had a conversation at length. I didn't know anything about him other than he wrote blog material over at like Rational Faith under the pseudonymous name of Consigliere. And he was participating on discussion boards, but I didn't know that really at the time. I just saw his blog post about this historical issue. And I'm being a little ambiguous here because there's a moment where he's under his real name and there's a moment where he is something different, and people can go figure that out, but we never, part of the fun of this is just allowing that to kind of sit there. But as we explored that topic, it became clear to me that, like Chris and Clay, he was another person who was so well-rounded
Okay.
with a deep depth of Mormonism. And so after our conversation on this one historical topic, I said, I said, RFM, of course, he wasn't that at the time. I said, RFM, I don't know you well, but I can tell you know Mormonism. You ought to consider doing a podcast.
Okay.
And he said he had always wanted to do a podcast, but never knew how to do it. And so I said, well, that's not a big deal. I know how to do it. I'll show you how to do it.
All right.
And so over the next couple of weeks, I showed him how to use recording software like Audacity, um, showed him how we could create a space in our umbrella for him to have his own website, him to have his own branding, and to show him how to edit audio and how to create a thumbnail and all that stuff. And if you go back to the early episodes of RFM, he is editing out every breath he takes. He's editing out, any noises he makes that are not him saying words, he gets rid of.
Mm.
And somewhere along the way, I'm like, hey, don't do that. Leave some humanity in your audio.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was a obvious from episode one
Huh.
that he was really good at conveying Mormon information to an audience in a way that everybody's like, that was entertaining, that was informative. I really enjoyed that. So he built a following in his podcast, in my mind, faster than anyone else did. I thought he was just within 10 episodes, he had a huge loyal following. And his episodes were amazing. When I look back at Wrong Roads that he did, talking about Elder Holland and his son, and when they went down the wrong road, that was God telling them that they had gone down the wrong road. That way they could turn around and go down the right road. Um, just an incredible episode. And so RFM, I think, was just a natural at this from day one. And I don't think he's had to look back once. It's just been an incredible ride.
Yeah, it has been a remarkable ride. So you're the one that initially recognized the talent that, hey, this guy should have a podcast. And of course, that was something that was already rolling in his mind as well. And it's funny because I'm a YouTube guy. Like I watch all my podcasts on YouTube. So I'm watching Joe Rogan on YouTube, but then I hear John Dehlin reference Radio Free Mormon. And so actually I that was the only podcast that I actually listened to at the time because I was kind of got on my radar screen. So I just remember being in rural Florida where I was caretaking of some property and I would turn on the sorry, I would turn on the Amazon and just say, Alexa, please play uh, Radio Free Mormon, and I would have dinner and listen to it, and it was so well done, and I felt like he has the natural voice and talent for that. So it must have been a real like coup for you to have landed somebody of the talent level and the gravitas of somebody along the lines of Radio Free Mormon,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
let me
so
say something. Let me say
yeah,
something about that. So, first off, you said, "Oh, Bill, you're the one who discovered him." No, he was already known in
okay.
apologetic circles.
In,
He
in the
was
blog, right, in the blog context, but not in the podcast context. You're the one that made would that be correct? You're the one that said, hey, this guy needs to do podcasting in addition to the stuff that he was doing. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, but I
Okay.
want to acknowledge like he was writing uh apologetic materials, not just participating in Rational Faith's blog, but he was contributing in apologetic periodicals. So there were various documents that he wrote that had to do with apologetic issues in Mormonism. And I think he had already made a name for himself in that space. So, yes, I suggested, like, hey, you probably have the skill set to do a podcast. You ought to do it. Um, but I don't think anybody needed to discover his talent. I think he was uh, anywhere he shows up speaking, it's clear that he
It's clear.
understands a ton about Mormonism.
He's not only super knowledgeable of the subject, but he's just super, super talented. So,
He's a
Bill,
he's a good conveyor of information. He knows how to articulate an idea so that an audience walks away understanding it, and he's better at that than I think most people are. So,
yeah, I think so too. And that's what was so I gravitated to listening to him Like I said, the only podcast I was listening to at the time, just audible podcasts was that one. And so at this point, okay, I need to ask you, and by the way, Bill, I still want to go a little bit here. How are we doing on time for you?
We're doing great. Keep
Okay,
going.
great. So this is I think is really important because and again, just to kind of parallel something for you too. When I first decided to start my channel, I would have described myself as an agnostic. Okay. And what's so interesting is as I've entered into this space, I've actually grown in my faith, if that makes any sense. You entered into this space, you and RFM, as being, maybe you're nuanced, but you are still members and believers in the church. And now you guys have since kind of left faith. So I want you to kind of talk about your story, about how this transition occurred, and even just even with RFM, like, did you guys both, was this roughly the same time? I mean, just tell me the process of finally just getting out altogether.
Yeah, I don't even know that I wouldn't want to speak for him, but I don't even know if I could. Like, what's his
Right.
timeline of when he stopped believing?
We'll have RFM back on to talk about that
Yeah,
because I want to
but I
talk to him about that.
yeah, but I will say 2015, somewhere along the way in 2015, I had come to the final conclusion that Mormonism couldn't possibly be true.
Okay.
But I still thought, but it's good. Like the leaders are just naive. The leaders are just uh, old men behind the times and ill-equipped to move a thriving, vibrant church uh, in a way that shows up with honesty, transparency, and vulnerability. And I thought, the church can still be good. It is good. Let's figure out how we support the church doing that. And so if you look at a lot of my content in 2015, I'm pretty adamant that there are issues that don't add up, and I'm going to keep going because I think this is a good for me to be here. And then the November 2015 policy happened. And if you go look at my episodes at the time, one of them was called an emotional gut punch. Um, I
Hmm.
was I was decimated by
Okay.
the policy in 2015 because that's the first real strong moment where I'm like, oh, not only is the church not true, the leaders the leaders behave and think in such a way that indicates they are not good.
Okay, now
Um,
it's important
yeah.
because then how did you view the church's activities with Proposition 8 in 2008 or whatever proposition number that was?
Yeah.
How were you able to reconcile that? Because why was it the 2015 policy that affected you and not the 2008 campaign?
Yeah, because when you are in the mission field, when you're a member of a ward or a bishop in Ohio, you don't really get that news. That isn't part of your Mormon experience. So while I'm doing the church in Ohio, I'm not really being confronted. Prop 8 isn't in my face. I don't really tackle Prop 8 until years later.
And it's funny because at
Um,
the same time, Randy Bell is helping organize in 2008 the church's campaign in California. So it's just interesting to see the effect all these things that the church has done has had an effect on many people's lives. And so for you, it just was background noise. It wasn't something that you were really paying attention to at the time. But then 2015 comes along, and that's really, I think, an important point that did affect a lot of people's relationship and how they viewed the church. Keeping in mind, of course, at this point, where people are starting to have more sympathetic, empathetic views towards LGBTQ people. We have Barack Obama as the president. We have marriage is now equality is happening. And now you have the church responding that way. And of course, in light of the family proclamation in the 90s, the 2008 campaign, why would you have taken it as such a gut punch? Wouldn't it have just been the logical thing that they would have done at that point?
yeah, the best way for me to explain that is that while I'm primarily focused in 2012, 2013, 2014, even in the front end, with helping people who are in a faith crisis, you can't do that work with empathy and not not start to see the other issues.
Yeah,
Racism,
okay.
gender inequality,
Hmm.
patriarchy, uh, LGBT folks.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, as I'm having to confront how the church is not being the best, uh, the best kind of leaders to people who are in a faith crisis, I'm also learning that it hasn't been the best kind of leaders to those other vulnerable groups as well. And as I'm going to workshops or retreats where people are in this post Mormon space, I'm interacting with people from not just the doubting community, but from the LGBT community, people affected by the race and priesthood issue, women affected by patriarchy. And my empathy is showing up for all of those groups. I'm also listening to, um, oh, what's the name of it? It's a radio program, but it's also a podcast. I can't remember his name, but he interviewed Wendy Montgomery, uh, whose son at the time was an Aaronic priesthood holder. He's gay, and his ward isn't letting him pass the sacrament. When he does pass it, people in the pews are refusing to take the sacrament from him. And
Oh,
so
wow.
his mom, Wendy Montgomery, is one of the originators of the Mama Dragons, and she's sticking up for her kid. And I listened to this podcast episode. Again, it was a radio program, the Cultural Hall podcast.
Okay.
Um, and I listened to them interview Wendy Montgomery about her story, and I'm just like, oh, this isn't the kid's fault. This is the church's inability to deal responsibly with someone who's gay. And I ended up having to pull off to the side of the road. I was in tears.
Mm, okay.
I immediately go home, and it was a Monday that I listened to that. And I'm like, hey, we're going to drop what we were doing for Family Home Evening. Our family's going to listen to this interview, and we're going to talk about how the church treats the LGBT community and how we can talk about how we're going to show up differently than that. And so we listened to that as a family, and it was clear from that point. Like I have everyone in my family, my ex, my kids, everybody was like, the church is not healthy on this issue. It needs to change. And we, in our own individual lives, are not going to show up reiterating this bad articulation of shame and judgment to people who are just human differently than I'm human. It was a really big moment.
Okay, I get that. I get that totally. I think sometimes it's easy for us to think a certain way, like, oh, well, why didn't you see this in 2008, or why didn't you see this in the 1990s? Sometimes we're just so disconnected from other people and their experiences. Is that, for me, when I first entered this space, I'd never interacted with transgender individuals before. And I learned a lot of things. I still don't completely understand it, but I'm trying to be understanding of it. And they're wonderful people. I've had developed great friendships, but yeah, I had no sense of connectivity to that community until I started engaging. So yeah, I think that's good. That's growth on our parts too. We're learning. We're white guys from the Midwest, right? I mean, that says a lot. Maybe we kind of lived in our own little bubbles as well. Um, okay, so so would you say that's the moment where you were saying like, okay, no, Mormonism is not true, but the church is good, or there's good intentions. The November policy happens, and you're saying, no, I think now this is a church with bad intentions. Would you frame it that way?
Yeah. I spent 3 days following the Ryan McKnight unveiling that this policy change had happened. I spent the next 3 days in what I'll call depression, and I've never been one to experience depression
Huh.
in my life, but I spent 3 days just going like, oh, I'm I'm not actually going to be able to navigate Mormonism if this is what Mormonism chooses to be. Um, and so if you go listen to those episodes, I'm very direct with the church that what you've done here with this policy is wrong. And this is not an appropriate way to protect yourself from this group because your theology uh, doesn't coincide with supporting them, and so you're choosing to uphold hurtful theology in an effort to perpetuate your system rather than treat people in a responsible, healthy way. Like you're trying to avoid changing your church at the expense of hurting people. And I'm sorry, but I can't belong to a church that does that. And so from that point forward, the policy in 2015, it is clear to me and it's clear to the church that I'm no longer on the right side of the line.
So you would move, okay. So you would move now. I asked you what kind of Mormon were you? And then you decided that it's no longer true, but there's some good in the church to now you think that maybe this isn't the institution that you thought it was and that you had a more negative view. Would you describe yourself as now an anti-Mormon?
I would now describe myself at that point as a honest, forthright critic of the church.
Okay. And would you say anti-Mormon would be an unfair term to use on you, or would you, if somebody wanted to call you an anti-Mormon at that point, would they be able to, or do you feel that's just too loaded of a term to use?
Um, I think it's too loaded of a term because I'm not anti-Mormon. I still consider myself a Mormon, even to this day.
Okay.
If you said, Bill, are you a Mormon? I would have to go like, oh, that's a big question that has more to do than just whether I'm a member on the rolls of the LDS Church or not. Um, so anti-Mormon seems to indicate that you're against Mormons, and I'm against dishonesty. I'm against obfuscation. I'm against carefully worded history that isn't accurate to the documentary history. I'm anti avoidance of accountability. I'm anti lying. I'm anti hurting people at the expense of perpetuating a system. And if somebody wants to call me anti Mormon, man, that's a pretty big conversation to go like, oh, so you're going to justify all those things that your leaders do at the expense of the truth teller who becomes the bad guy? That's a silly framing.
Okay. Fair enough. I think it's fair enough to view it that way as well. So then the question then becomes is the purpose of your podcast originally was to shift through these issues, have these tough conversations, find a way to retain your faith to fight despite all the difficulties, right? Now, the question is, what is the purpose of your podcast today? And do you have an end game?
An end game. Prior to that moment, the branding was Mormon Discussion Leading with Faith.
Hmm.
That was the subtitle, Leading with Faith. That was the that was on the logo. So it would say Mormon Discussion underneath Leading with Faith. After that moment, it was Mormon Discussion, Navigating Mormonism one episode at a time. Because that's neutral, right? Like that's just let's navigate Mormonism, whether it's true or it's not, whether this issue works in favor of the church or it doesn't. So do I have an end game? No. I think our content is deeply helpful to a large number of people. And my goal is to be that kind of help to people for as long as possible. My goal is to help people be as informed on Mormonism as possible, to have enough information around as many issues as possible that they can uh, know all the information or know where to find all the information, which now gives them sort of a sense of informed consent that they can investigate Mormonism, make decisions about whether they stay or they leave or they invest whatever amount of time or energy or resources into it that they want to. And I don't have any goal that people have to leave or they have to stay. I do I do require the church to be as honest and forthright with people as possible so that people can make informed decisions about how they live their life. When you say end game, I think often, I say this a lot, but I know people who say, I want to see the thing burn down. I want to burn it
Yes,
to the ground.
I want to ask you that because this is
Yeah.
how it's described to me is that John Dehlin wants to reform the church. You want to burn the thing down to the ground. And I hear that frequently from all different sides. Is that a fair thing to say about you?
Um, if Mormonism disappeared, I don't think that's a net negative on the world. Uh, I don't know that it's a net positive either. I think Mormonism does good and bad things, and I'm perfectly comfortable acknowledging some of the good that it does, and to be honest and open about what I think is not good, that it carries out, harm that it puts on the world. And while I know a lot of people who say that I'd like to see it burn to the ground, my very next thought when they say that is you'll waste your entire life's energy fighting for a thing that when you take your last breath, it will still be there.
Okay.
And so if you spend your life burning it to the ground, you'll die and it'll still exist. And I don't want to spend my life that way. So um, if the leaders are compelled by being embarrassed by their own dishonesty, if they are forced to change because they're confronted with their own unhealthiness, that's just life. I'm just uh I'm just one voice out here trying to shine a light on the church's problems so that its leaders recognize they can't get away with the status quo anymore. And I would look at the last decade and a half and say that it's quite obvious that voices like mine are working. That when we raise criticisms of the church, its dishonesty, its bad interpretations of history, it is being compelled in the very present moment to make significant shifts to be more vulnerable, more honest, and more transparent. And I think it's got further to go than the distance it's come.
Okay, so you would say that you expect that the church will be around in your lifetime, and that it would be a chaotic thing to try to go after the and bring the thing down, and that you would actually want to just lead to improvements, make it a safe space, a more transparent space, a place where there's more accountability. And if you see that happening, and if you think that your platform is helping provide that, that you would look at that as kind of maybe what you're trying to accomplish in this space.
Yeah, if first and foremost people are getting the information that is supportive of their working through the journey, again, this isn't a stagnant audience. Yes, there are
Yeah,
thousands of people who watch our work week in and week out who are loyal, but there's also this assembly line of people who are encountering doubts for the very first time
right.
today.
Yep, yep.
They're listening to apologetics. They can tell that something's being withheld from them. They're not exactly being given the full story. They find people like me, and on the front end they're probably apprehensive and distrusting. They watch a number of episodes and they can see that RFM and I are maybe, again, not I'm not saying we're more honest than all people on this space, but I think we're as honest about Mormon history as anyone is. And I think we're telling you our truth. Maybe we're wrong. The believer thinks we're wrong, but we deeply believe that we're telling history in the most accurate way, to the extent where Dan Vogel, who again, apologists are going to discredit because he's a critic, but generally speaking, he is seen as a really good historian in Mormonism with a ton of credibility. And he watches our Mormonism Live almost every week. And when he's asked, why do you watch this? He says, because those two guys are really good at history.
Mm.
So I think we're really good at history. And so people come to our work, maybe distrusting on the front end, but over a matter of 5 or 10 episodes, realize that maybe we're the only ones in their circle who are actually telling them the truth. And new people are coming to that every day. I still get messages on the regular of people going, I just found you 3 months ago. This
Mhm.
is life changing. You are explaining things in a way that nobody else took the time to do and help me understand it in a way that I think I'm finally getting an honest telling of more of the Mormon narrative. And so, as long as people are showing up wanting to figure out the messiness of Mormonism, I deeply believe that our umbrella, that Radio Free Mormon and I's content that we create, is extremely helpful to people in figuring it out.
Yeah, I tell people, I talk to people all the time, Bill, that are going through faith crises, or mixed marriages. We know we've probably had similar conversations with many people, and I just tell people, and I tell this to just regular Latter-day Saints. I said, listen, there's somebody right now that's fully bought in, believes in the church, follows the brethren, accepts the whole corpus of Mormonism, and 2 weeks from now they're going to be an atheist. I mean, sometimes we can see that faith, and that happens every day. And
One
so,
only has to look at Jeff Strong's data that he just put out,
yes,
where he says not only did 40% of Latter-day Saints over the last 2 decades, who at one time considered themselves extremely active and faithful, have left the church. But Jeff also points to, of the remaining people, 1/3 of them who are still active and attending church and seem to be full go in Mormonism don't believe it, have arrived at the position that there's enough stuff here that doesn't match up, that the church is not what it claims to be. That's significant.
it is substantial. And not only that, folks, but I've had multiple contacts and multiple conversations with people in the know, and they will tell you that that 40% is a very, very conservative estimate, that the actual number of people that have left is much higher than that. Just putting that out there. I've put some numbers out there. I've talked to people in different spaces in the know, and they would confirm that 40% would be a very, very conservative estimate. So Bill, one of the things I love about this space is how important a role Reddit has played. And I remember spending years and years on the ex-Mormon Reddit, and then found my way in the Mormon Reddit, which I kind of prefer the Mormon one because that's kind of a little bit more middle of the road, and so I feel more comfortable in that space. So last night I actually went on Reddit and just said, "Hey, I'm going to be interviewing Bill." And I would love to get some feedback about any of you have any questions. So it's going to be an oral history about Bill's past involvement in Mormon apologetics and the history of Mormon Discussion Inc. Please feel free to post any questions or comments here that can help inform the conversation. And I will say we got a nice turnout of people, a lot of good feedback, and I'm just going to kind of go over a few things that people have brought out. And I asked you, is there any no-go zones here? And you said no. So I want to appreciate, first of all, I just to greatly appreciate you doing that. And I guess one of my first questions for you would be, and this is based on some of the questions that we received here, is Jacob Hansen, or apologists in general, are there any Mormon apologists out there that you have respect for? I imagine you would list like Jim Bennett as being one, but what kind of, like, is there an area of apologetics that you actually think is productive and that you can engage with?
Yeah, this is uh, this is a divided conversation because on one hand, I think Terrell Givens and Patrick Mason and Jim Bennett are a great land, a little plateau or a little space to sort of slow down and stop for a moment and feel supported in the beginning stages of a faith deconstruction. In other words, you start to sense that things are falling apart, and voices like Givens and Bennett and Mason let you know that you're not alone. There's a degree of compassion that comes with their apologetics, and it's a little way station where people can hang out for a while and take a breather in this really difficult thing where your identity's being unraveled, your family relationships are being questioned and criticized, and you're feeling shame and judgment for having doubts. Uh, so I want to just acknowledge the good that they are and that they do. That said, I have a really difficult issue with apologists in the church because I can sense that they know they can only go so far in the conversation, and that I've had enough conversations off the record with all of them, and over the years as I've interviewed them, I would end the interview and then I would keep them on another 10 minutes and I would talk to them, and they would always articulate after the interview a different framing inside their head than they are presenting publicly. And you're
Mhm.
shaking your head, so I'm guessing that you've seen and known that too.
And this is not just
Ooh,
progressive apologists, this is conservatives apologists too, to be
all of
very
them.
clear. Yes.
All of them.
Hmm.
And so what I'm learning is that while I'm just saying what's going on inside, that's all I've ever done. Every step along the way, once I got to our Bad Days episode, was me going like, I'm just gonna say what I'm thinking and feeling. And there came a point where I had to do that like completely. I just want to represent what's going on inside of me around the things I think about in Mormonism. And when I see Jim Bennett and Patrick Mason and Terrell Givens tell the listener a certain framing of Mormonism that they don't exactly hold themselves inside, but they're presenting it to the person as if they do, I feel like they are creating a dishonest space where the listener gets to perceive that things are resolved more easily than the person telling them actually believes they're resolved. And I think that leads to people getting stuck in thinking the church might still be true when it would have been much healthier for them to feel safe, to know that maybe it isn't, and to start to move to their own autonomous, best lived life where they're making their own choices about how their life looks rather than feeling manipulated, shamed, or judged inside Mormonism to continue to hold on to it.
It's I've said this before. I said progressive Mormons belong to a church that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I'm just stating balls and strikes, folks. This is how I see it. And I'm reminded because actually my final deconstruction out of faith was actually Sam Harris's book, A Letter to a Christian Nation. And I remember him specifically saying, and for those of you progressive Christians dressing up in your little costumes and playing church, you are doing more harm because you're giving cover to the fundamentalists that are blowing up the World Trade Center. And I had that moment, oh, I don't think I can believe anymore if I'm giving cover to the fundamentalists, to the extremists of religion. You're kind of giving them cover. And again, I've reconstructed. I'm back in faith. Well, I'm a deconstructed evangelical, but that hit me so strong because as I was trying to hold on to faith, my last thing I was tethered in was like, okay, well, maybe I can be a progressive Christian. And I realized that there's almost there's a futility to being a progressive Mormon or even a progressive Christian. And I think that's the weak underside of both of those positions. Speak to that.
Yeah.
And the one thing I would speak to is in addition to that, I also want you to talk about the tension between the ex-Mormon community and progressives. I always tell people that's where the real tension is, because essentially what you have is two groups that have the same information, know the same stuff, and they resent each other. And there's a real tension there too in that
Yeah.
space.
Let me give an example. So, a year or so ago on Mormonism After Dark, and a show that I'm not doing currently, but one which RFM and I both co-hosted in the past, Jackson Washburn calls in at the end of the show, and he wants to talk about the topics that we had talked about that night. And somehow the conversation led into me asking Jackson if he had a 14-year-old daughter, would he allow her to work in the Joseph Smith home? And there's this thing that happens, as you point out, there's this really big tension that probably exists stronger between me and Givens and Mason and Bennett and Jackson than me and Dan Peterson, right? And that tension is that even the most compassionate of apologists are trying to maintain some level of signaling to the leaders of the church that we're still in and we're loyal and we're not going to cross the line. And for me, it's like, let's just tell the truth. Let's just tell the truth, whatever the cost is. Like I took on the cost. I got excommunicated. I had my ward members uh, 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 look at me with judgment and disavow me as any source of truth. Like I've had the hurt that comes from being honest about not believing in this system anymore. Let's just be honest. And so when I asked Jackson a question, and he goes through this 6 minute runaround, 8 minute runaround, where he does not want to be on the record answering for himself whether he would let Joseph Smith watch a kid or not. To me, it's avoidance. It's an unhealthy need to maintain your world at the expense of just telling the truth. Um, and so Jackson has his reasons for doing that, and I'm not diminishing those. I understand that being Mormon is important to him, and I acknowledge that he is more compassionate around issues than other people inside the system. But when you come up with so many workarounds in your conversation so as to avoid just the yes or no of the question, and you need to articulate it in a way that your wife carries some of the responsibility for why you wouldn't do that, or I would trust Joseph Smith no more or less than a stranger. Well, really, let's ask about that. Would you really trust Joseph Smith the same as a stranger? Um, Anytime I poked at those fortifications that he has up around his point of view, I would get obfuscation from him. And I've seen that in Patrick Mason to a lesser extent, by the way. I've seen that in Jim Bennett. I can't remember what it was. It was the SEC scandal. And I reached out to Bennett on Facebook and said, "Really? Look at this. Here's your perfect opportunity to just be direct and say that you are disappointed in the leader's dishonesty and that what they did in creating 13 dummy companies and hiding all this money was wrong." And Bennett responded with, "I can't do that. Do you really think I can do that? I can't do that." Um, I'm well aware that voices on the inside that defend the church but also know all the problems, they have to couch their words a certain way, and they at times have even acknowledged they have to couch their words a certain way. And the way I'm designed is that that is a lesser priority to me than reducing and preventing the harm that would come if I was to speak inauthentically about how I think about all these things. And so I deem them as making different choices based on different values, but my internal structures deem their way of doing it as abusive, dishonest, and prioritizing maintaining their identity and place in the system over reducing the harm of everyone collectively.
Okay, so now you've talked about some more progressive element of apologists. What are your views on the more orthodox conservative apologists? Are there some there that you have respect? I know you for a while there you attempted to do a series with Jacob Hansen. Um, talk about that space.
Yeah.
And keeping in mind, folks, I'm friends with all these people, but I
Yeah.
think it's important to get Bill's perspective on this. This is an important story he's telling.
That's You get to believe whoever you want. That side of things portrays me as a grifter, as dishonest, as misinformed, as on some level working with the force of evil to bring the church down, right? Those are the kinds of labels that I get. People get to decide whether that's true or not. But my truth is that I'm just trying to tell the truth and to do so in a way that's as effective as possible at reducing the church's ability to avoid that. When I look at people like Dan Peterson, Lou Midgley, Brian Hales, Scott Gordon, John Lynch, Steve Densley, that's his name. Um, when I look at people like Jacob Hansen, uh, Ward Radio, I see human beings who need Mormonism to be true so badly that they have to uh, cater to unhealthy parts of themselves that convince them that the best thing to do is to misrepresent something, to obfuscate something, or to avoid the conversation altogether. Um, when I look at the way Jacob Hansen, for instance, shows up in a conversation, I see him as a master manipulator who is catering, knowing what his person he's speaking to, what degree of knowledge they have about Mormonism, and then he tackles the conversation in a way that pushes the conversation where he wants it to go, rather than going like, hey, really, what's at stake here is whether Mormonism is true or not. So we ought to develop a conversation that actually allows the critic to poke holes at Mormonism to see if our patches actually hold. And folks like Jacob Hansen, Dan Peterson, Brian Hales, they don't really have a desire to let you utilize them to show that Mormonism doesn't hold up. And they want to avoid those kinds of conversations at all cost, to the extent that in certain moments they have been what I will call deeply dishonest, uh, and using fallacies, uh, using manipulative tactics in their conversation with the other side, so as to avoid allowing Mormonism to be exposed, to show that it has the problems that it does and that it doesn't add up.
So, again, this is oral history, and I think it's important to document this. You did make an attempt to have conversations with Jacob Hansen on your platform. What
Yeah,
happened? What happened?
yeah. The moment he saw that I had him cornered, I'll give an example. I put Joseph Smith's claim that of the Adamic language up on the screen. And when you see Joseph Smith say, this is the original language of Adam, what's the word for God? All men, angels, men as angels. When you see that, you immediately go like, oh, he's just taking English and creating a funny sort of word out of English, that when you understand how languages change, how really modern English is, and how any derivative of English that far back would have no resemblance to English at all, it's crystal clear that Joseph Smith is just talking out of his rear end and making it up. When I put it up on the screen, I asked Jacob, do you really think Joseph Smith understands the Adamic language? He answers no, because he can't get caught looking stupid. So he answers no, but immediately he's like, I'm not answering any more questions like that again. And you can see in the conversation in real time him step back from having any level of like, let Bill ask the most difficult questions in Mormonism, and let's just see if Mormonism can answer those. Because it's really not about whether Jacob is true or not, it's about whether Mormonism is true or not. And so the interlocutor in a conversation about the truth claims of Mormonism, the believer should, if you're putting forth the best effort, the believer should allow the critic to ask the best questions to see if Mormonism holds up. And what you find Jacob Hansen or Dan Peterson or Brian Hales do is at the moment they realize there's someone in front of them who could ask the best questions to see if Mormonism holds up, they step away from those conversations and want nothing to do with them.
It's interesting. I will say, I think that a lot of apologetics in general is a product of the American culture, which is our team, their team. It doesn't really matter what's true. What's important is that we back our team, and I think both sides are guilty of that too, Bill. I think there's a toxicity that I see in the ex-Mormon community that's really bad too, and John Dehlin and I have talked about that. So I think that it can go both ways. But I appreciate you talking about that and acknowledging, something like with I kind of look at Jacob Hansen as being kind of like it's like a political commentator or a debater. That's kind of the approach that he's taking. So he's basically just being reflective of the American culture that we live in. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I do think like that's just I kind of understand the bit because we get when we turn on Fox News or CNN, we understand what's really happening in front of the camera there, right? Okay, and I kind of see that's kind of just a result of the culture we're in. And so yeah, I can understand why you'd be frustrated, but there's just when it comes across, people don't really want to have these conversations. They just want to have debates.
I
And
do. I want to
well,
have these conversations. I
I
want to
agree.
show out
Right.
loud. whether Mormonism actually holds up or not. And I know what questions to ask.
Correct.
And if you're willing, as an informed believer, if you're willing to go like, I'm going to let Bill ask his best questions and I'm going to set my ego aside and I'm just going to try to let him walk out the logic of whether Mormonism is true or not. I'll give Mormonism's best defense and let's just see where it goes. I want that. Maybe it's because I know where it ends. Maybe I know I'm on the winning team, but I want that.
Well,
I
could that
want.
could that be a potential blind spot for you though? Don't you think that
Uh,
by having that position that like I'm on the winning team, I know what's right, don't you think that that could lead to some incorrect things?
Not any more than I think Leah Remini's right about Scientology, or that the critics of Jehovah's Witnesses are right about the Jehovah's Witnesses, or the critics of Heaven's Gate, or David Koresh, or Jim Jones were right about those, and that any guru or founder of a high demand fundamentalist religion is it, and its leaders after that person are continually manipulating people into believing into a false system. And I'm convinced that religion is myth, useful at times. We can argue that. I can give benefit of the doubt that religion is a tool that allows us as a people to perpetuate truths within the story in ways that people will remember it and carry it on from generation to generation. But for us to argue that Scientology is neutral and its critics have a blind spot in knowing that it's false,
Okay.
that's absurd. Like, we all know Scientology is ridiculous and absurd, and just because someone used to be in it and they're out and they now know it's absurd doesn't mean that them knowing it's absurd is a blind spot.
Do you think that Christianity is absurd?
Um, I find the same reasons that I deconstructed Mormonism and learned not to trust the faithful narrative, that those same tools were useful in deconstructing Christianity. I think the difference between Christianity generally and any particular unhealthy system is that the Christ figure of the New Testament can be, if you isolate just him and what he said, for the most part, there's exceptions, but for the most part, everything he said and did could be used to help humans be better, to be more accountable, and to develop more into uh, a human being with greater gifts to bring into the world and to reduce harm. The trouble is that all of Christianity, and that's a blanket statement, let me say most of Christianity has misused the Christ figure to further their own agenda. But if we just look at Christ of the New Testament, I could sit with you, Steve, all day, and we could go through the New Testament, and I could find and have found so much good in the Christ figure. Jesus Christ in the New Testament is very different than Joseph Smith in Mormonism. Um, it is obvious from the documentary history that Joseph Smith perpetuated, on some level, a fraud and a degree of abuse on the Latter Day Saints, um, that we shouldn't make excuses for or say that we need to remain neutral about.
Would you consider yourself a follower of the authentic Christ figure?
Yeah, I did a podcast called the Mythical Jesus Podcast, and it's on the website christoffaith.org. I started with the assumption that Jesus is not a literal figure in the sense that some guy died for the sins of the world and reanimated after being dead for 3 days, but that he, in part, was a religious zealot in his community, a rebellious teacher in his community, that there are lots of stories attributed to him. Some of them may have happened, some of them didn't. Certainly, the miraculous parts aren't part of the story. And can we still learn from the Christ figure and find great value in him as a model of teaching us to be a better human? And that ended up going, I don't know, 30 episodes. I'd love to return to it someday. And I still think I could easily pick up right where I left off and episode to episode explain the deep value in the Christ figure of the New Testament. But that's a very different thing than saying I believe him to be the Messiah, or nor do I believe everything attributed to him actually occurred.
So, in one sense, you could say that you are a follower of the teachings of the authentic Christ character.
in the same way that I'm a follower of the wisdom of Brene Brown or a follower of the wisdom of Don Miguel Ruiz or Eckhart Tolle or Jack Kornfield. Um, I don't think that Jesus is necessarily the best wisdom teacher. I think there are also really big flaws with some of the things attributed to the Christ figure. Just like every human being, such as Brene Brown or Eckhart Tolle, those guys have flaws too. And I'm perfectly comfortable taking the positive wisdom from any person and discarding that which is not useful.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I could go more into that. Maybe we can continue that subject at another time because I think I really want to push you on that because I think it's important to talk about, what does historic Christianity look like? What does primitive Christianity look like? And what does Jesus, who is Jesus? And the character is really important. So a couple more things, and then I want to wrap this up, but I did want to address a few things. You said that you're an open book, so I want to do it. Somebody brought up the topic of Maven, who was involved in your on your show, and they brought this up on the Mormon Reddit, and they want to know what happened. And I told you ahead of time I was going to ask you about this, and so I just want to get your perspective on the whole Maven Brody affair.
Yeah. Let me start by saying that every human has their perception of reality,
Correct.
right?
Mhm.
And so, in any interaction, for instance, that you and I have, and we've been fairly neutral with each other, I've never felt criticized by you. I don't think you've ever felt criticized by me, but I know that you think about the world differently than me. And your experience in our interaction almost certainly is entirely different inside your head than my experience in my head is. So I grant on the front end that Maven has had an experience that she feels a lot of feelings about. But that I've also had an experience, and RFM has had an experience in that interaction that we also have feelings about. Maven, we didn't fire Maven. Uh, Maven came to us, and well, let me start off. Let's say it this way: in our episode that was the beginning point of this, Maven was hired to be a behind the scenes person who managed our tech in such a way that my brain could focus on the conversation and not be pulled in multiple places because my one track mind doesn't do that well. Over time, Maven would show up on screen, and we certainly wanted her to be able to share her voice when she thought it was important. I don't want to take anybody's voice away. There was a particular episode where she was sharing her pro choice thoughts. And we have people in our audience who are supporters of our program, they're donors, and they had a different view. They're pro life, and they're pro life for their own reasons. They're not a believing Mormon anymore, and they're still pro life. And Maven's reactions to them pushing back against her were ways that seemed to criticize and diminish the person for even disagreeing in the first place. So it wasn't a conversation about what's the merits of the perspective. It was, I'm right, you're wrong, you're dumb for thinking that. And again, she didn't say it that way, but that's the feelings that some of these people felt. So we got messages after the episode of people who support our program who don't understand why we're allowing an episode about Mormonism to be about politics. You and I were talking before the show starts. I have political views, and maybe you're going to ask about that in a little bit. But my political views almost never make it into my content because those are two different spaces, and I try to support a space where you can believe all kinds of things outside of Mormonism, but you come here to learn a factual historical telling of the events of Mormonism without having to have any other view you have being judged. And so we've never really been political, RFM or myself. We both have had conversations away from our public content saying, like, we both have political views. We're not going to bring those to the content that we create. And we've avoided that. When the episode was over and we had gotten the negative feedback, I reached out to Maven and said, like, hey, can we just not do that going forward? You're coming across in a way that's abrasive to people who think differently than you. And it's on an issue that makes no sense for us to alienate our audience. when they come here to get support and validation about the issues in Mormonism, she reached out to us in a phone call with me and RFM. And at least the way I understood it, and RFM can speak for himself, but my understanding is that he understood it the same way, that what she was saying was, I need to be able to say these things, and you shouldn't stop me from saying them. I should have a right to say them. And my point of view was, as the executive director of a nonprofit that's geared to helping people in this Mormon space, is why would I want to alienate people who are being helped by us by delving into things that aren't part of what we're doing? That's not part of the work here. And so, as her employer, it seems perfectly appropriate for the employer to tell the employee that, hey, if to be an employee at this place, this is the way we conduct ourselves here, and we don't talk about the things that are offensive, especially in ways that claim you're right and they're wrong. It ended there. Maven said, fine, I think I'm going to need to step away. And my response was, I support you in that. Like, if you feel like it, you cannot show up here without talking about these things, then I support you stepping away. And so she steps away. Um, I'm an introvert. You
Right.
can ask RFM.
Yeah.
I don't I don't take the initiative to enter conversations with him outside of talking about our work
Right.
without, he's the one who calls me. He's the extrovert. He calls me and wants to talk about life. I enjoy those conversations, but I don't
You
like
don't
telephone
you don't
calls.
pick up the phone. I know we've had this conversation before too.
I
Yeah.
don't, I
Yeah.
don't, I
Yeah.
get anxiety around
Hmm.
telephone calls.
Hmm.
I'd much rather stand in front of 10,000 people at a packed stadium and be given 5 minutes of prep before the talk has to happen and go, hey, the guy dropped out speaking. You're going to go up on stage. And I'd love that.
Hmm.
Put me on a phone call with my girlfriend, put me on a phone call with my mom before she died. I'd start feeling a ton of anxiety. So I
Yes.
avoid those kinds of interactions. So Maven felt like Bill ended contact. Well, the truth is, Bill was only having contact around the work that we were doing. I cared about Maven. I care about all the friends in my space, but ask Randy Bell how often I reach out to him. Ask Anthony Miller or Brittany Hartley how often I reach out to them. They are my dearest of friends. I love them, but I am built inside in such a way that I'm the guy who goes to the back of the room and sits on the couch. And if someone comes and talks to me, great, I enjoy that. But I don't have the energy to put myself into those spaces without it costing me a lot. I'll go to Sunstone, I'll go to a Thrive. People will come up and talk to me. I enjoy that. And then for the next 4 to 7 days, I have to collapse, stay at home, hide in my basement, and regain my energy back to neutral again. So Maven perceived me, and again, RFM has his own story, and his side of the story includes things that Maven never shared. That, at least for me, give me a pause to go like, hey, one ought to hear RFM's side of the story before making any judgment calls about how he treated her or she treated him.
Hmm.
Um, but she interpreted my distance as me giving her the cold shoulder, when in reality, she wasn't working with us anymore. And I'm an introvert, and I never was going to engage those conversations outside of work related generally anyway. Um,
So just real quick, so you never went to Maven and said you can't go on any other platforms to discuss your personal views. In other words, she had a right to say and believe what she wanted. If she wanted to go on another podcast and say why she's pro-choice, you would have been more than happy. You weren't trying to say she couldn't do that. Is that correct?
More than that, I offered her on numerous occasions the opportunity to have her own podcast, and that I would do everything behind the scenes to help her get off the ground running.
And then she could even talk about the stuff she wanted to talk about on her podcast on your platform.
She could create a podcast around whatever she wanted. Now, if it's not Mormonism, it probably isn't going to be under the umbrella of Mormon discussion,
Correct. Yeah.
but she would have still had me helping her set up a website, helping her learn how to edit audio. I offered that on numerous occasions, and I never gave any stipulation about what that needed to look like. She was free to put her voice out into the world with my support at any level she wanted to. if it wasn't Mormonism, it probably wouldn't be something I was going to advertise under the umbrella, but I would have done everything I could to at least acknowledge, like, hey, we've helped Maven get a start. Here's her podcast. If you're interested in these topics, go check out Maven's podcast. Certainly. Every time I offered that, she turned it down.
Okay. She turned down the help from you. Okay. Also, you guys had her come back on to say goodbye. Was that after she announced that she was leaving? What was there was where she came back at the end of the episode, she's saying she was leaving. Where is that in the timeline? Was that after you all decided to cut ties, or was that I mean, tell me what happened there.
So there's the episode where uh, I'll just say it directly, she offends a segment of our audience. We have a conversation with her that week. Then the following Mormonism Live, she's informed us she's stepping away.
Okay.
And so the following Mormonism Live, we said, "Hey, Maven, like this will be your last show. So we'd love to give you time to sort of say goodbye to the audience and all of that." Uh, and we did that. She did that. And as far as I knew, we ended everything amicably. I wasn't under the impression, like I was under the impression that she was making demands of the show that I couldn't I couldn't give to her, but that I wanted nothing more than her to be happy and successful putting her voice out there in whatever format she wanted to out into the world. Um, and when she ended up doing that, 4.5 hour, 5 hour podcast with Gene Judson, uh, I was caught off guard that she was feeling and thinking all of those things as this was happening. Because I thought it was simply a matter of like, hey, you having that point of view is great. There are spaces where you should be encouraged and be allowed to share that. Unfortunately, I can't do that here. More power to you. Go and be your best self and live your best life. But somewhere along the way, something got mistranslated and she took offense or saw intention in me that wasn't there.
Okay, so and just to clarify, you weren't no, you weren't under any pressure from any of your donors to drop her.
Uh, no, but it was also clear that she wasn't going to be able. According to her own words, the way I interpret her, again, her reality might be different, and I grant that.
Mhm.
My understanding was she was informing me, informing RFM, and you'd have to ask him for his point of view. But she was informing us that the only way I can stay is if you let me say these things when they come up. And I couldn't do that. And I don't think any business owner with an employee, uh, a subcontractor who is working for them, who doesn't represent the goals of the company that way, no company is going to let them have free reign to say and do what they want. We all have codes of conduct within our employment.
And so it's understood like when she's like monitoring the chat and she's interacting in the chat, that she also has to understand that she's representing Mormon Discussions Inc. and speaking for them. And so if she's taking these positions and saying that, well, this is like basically she's saying this is the position of a Mormon Discussion Inc. And you, of course, don't want that can't be the position because you want to be neutral and be respectful of people that have different views on that very difficult issue across the board. And so that's kind of how you see it. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah. And again, this is not to pick on Maven. All of us have moments in life where things are challenging and we're dealing with stuff that generally an employer, which most employers just want you to show up at work, put on a mask,
Mhm.
pretend everything's good in your life, and do the job. And there were times in Maven's time with us where her life had some challenges and she wasn't able to show up uh, doing the work the way that she was assigned to do the work. She was just either burned out or dealing with a thing in her life. I think I was so kind in those moments. I would have real conversations with her saying, like, hey, like, you're really not giving us the productivity that we need, but I'll be patient. Like, you're dealing with something. Like, that's okay. It just can't look like this forever. And again, if anybody ever has a chance to ask her if this is true. Did Bill ever come to you and say that you weren't performing up to par? And did he give a ton of grace for that as it was happening? And I would hope, because I think her answer would be yes. And so again, I thought I was more than fair to her, more than kind to her, more than graceful to her. I was caught off guard by her speaking out against me, against RFM, and against Mormon discussion.
Okay, well, fair enough. And thank you so much for giving us your perspective on this sensitive
Yeah.
topic. And speaking of a couple more sensitive topics, and then we'll wrap this up. Somebody was asking about, and again, you referred to your ex-wife. Some people are asking, did she divorce you because you left the church and your deconstruction? What's this? What? And I've heard people say that she's been going around saying things about you. Um, how do you just address that?
Yeah, 100%. So uh, let me start with our family's beliefs all came apart around the same time. So my ex, Amanda, uh, was done with church before I was done with church. My kids were done with Mormonism before I was done with Mormonism. I was the last person in my household to say, okay, all right, I got the message. I don't want to go anymore either. They were all like, thank goodness dad doesn't want to do this anymore. And she was saying the same thing. So no, she didn't leave me. We didn't get divorced because my faith fell apart and hers didn't. We all deconstructed Mormonism for different reasons. My Amanda and my kids were much more for the social reasons, like it treated marginalized, vulnerable groups in harmful ways, whereas mine was much more like this history doesn't add up. But there's overlap in both directions. So we all stepped away at the same time. My divorce, I still care deeply about Amanda. Um, our divorce occurred because um, I was a 17-year-old kid who, for reasons outside of Mormonism and reasons because of Mormonism, married the very first female who showed me love and acceptance. I had no regard for compatibility. I had no regard for the things that make a relationship work or not work. So we were married for 26 years, and I think she is the most incredible of human beings. But we had so many differences around orderedness, communication styles, uh, things that, like, if you took people and you said, let's let science decide whether people can make it or not, level of neuroticism, whether one is ordered or not, what is one's attachment style, what is one's conflict resolution style. There are things that make a relationship work or not work. I told Amanda for almost our entire marriage that we are so incompatible, and yet somehow we keep making it. And we were married for 26 years. And those were good years, but they also were full of parts of me inside being deeply unhappy and discontent. Uh, no fault of hers. Just you put two people who got married for various reasons, and she gets to speak to her reasons. But for me, it was a lot of what Mormonism pushes us to do. Any two people can make it. You shouldn't date for very long. You should get married right away. Compatibility doesn't matter. Just two good, active people in the gospel. And what I found being, becoming a grown adult and maturing in the world and having life experience was that the way I'm built inside, this incredible person just wasn't compatible for me to be okay inside my internal world. And our relation, we tried to adjust, we made shifts, we made changes, we tried to live our life differently. Let's show up this way for each other. Let's show up that way for each other. And at the end of the day, it just didn't work. It fell apart, and I want nothing but happiness and joy and her best life. and I miss her. Uh, I care about her deeply, but I could never have really made it work in the way that would have been healthy for me to be my best person in this world.
So you kind of actually take a lot of the blame for this. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, you could talk to anybody that I've spoken to at length. I'm happy to take all the blame.
Okay.
Any disconnect between her and I isn't her fault. It's our humanities were different and too different for it to work forever.
If Amanda ever wanted to tell her story in a public forum, would you object to that?
Um, I only hesitate here in part. Number one, we both made an agreement in the divorce not to speak ill of the other person.
Okay.
So there's a legal requirement there. Uh, but also, her feelings are hurt. And uh, you can tell a story about somebody and not say they did anything that was uh, really bad, but in a space where people are judging each other based on a Mormon expectation, it's easy to sort of alienate somebody against the believing crowd because somebody doesn't do Mormon the way Mormons say it has to be done. And so I have a lot of, just like that Our Bad Days episode, I have a ton of apprehension about anyone else telling my story because I think anytime we tell another person's sacred story, we're likely to get it wrong and to name motivations or intentions or our perception of why they did what they did, how they showed up in ways that uh, aren't their truth. And I think that if we come from a place of being hurt or angry, like the Maven story, I think there's a propensity to have a deeper inaccuracy there. So, um, am I reluctant to have Maven or anybody else who's had some uh, disconnect with me say whatever they want to say about me? Sure, like I'm reluctant about that, but I also have never been one to like tell people they can't tell their story. But in this instance, we both have agreed not to do that.
Okay. And fair enough. And it's a sensitive top subject, but you said my story. The question would be, what about her story?
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't tell your story in regards to a marriage without telling the other person's story.
Okay. That's okay.
Um, yeah.
All right. Fair enough. And the last question. A lot of people think that your platform is MAGA adjacent, or supporting of Donald Trump. Somebody specifically asked the question if you still support President Trump. It was worded in such a way that that was taken out by a moderator. But I wanted you just to kind of clear the air on, because a lot of people look at you guys as being more MAGA adjacent. Speak to that, or speak for yourself. Obviously, RFM can speak for himself.
Yeah. RFM can speak for himself. When it comes to politics, I consider myself a moderate. There are things on the left side of the aisle that I am deeply passionate about. LGBT issues, for instance. But even amidst that, so say the transgender issue. I think the right, their rhetoric is cruel and insensitive and harmful. I think there is a really healthy way, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, that you can show respect for the humanity that's in front of you in ways that the people on the right are not doing. And they're taking a really complex issue and trying to dwindle it down to some uh, straw man argument about people. That said, I th- I'm definitely weary of allowing, say, trans women in women's sports. Not because they're not fully human, not because they're not experiencing in their head what they're experiencing, because they are, but that there is uh, an increased chance of injury, harm, and discrediting to the other women who are in that sport. Like we haven't figured this issue out yet. And I know that as people listen to me explain, there's going to be people who get all fired up. I want to set, like again, I want to acknowledge all of the emotion that's in this issue. And yet, I think we need to be able to have a safe space to talk out loud about all the pros and cons on all the sides so that we as a society can figure out the best way to handle it. And whatever that is, it's not the way we're currently handling it. And the only way we can figure these things out is if we get a chance to talk about it. Now, I feel that way about all kinds of issues on both sides. Let me address Donald Trump. Um, there's something unhealthy in his psychopathy. Knowing his background enough, I know that, for instance, when he was younger, he would, if a company was considering utilizing him or his business, he would call them, pretend to be some other person, and then brag about Donald Trump and how awesome he is and how amazing. And I think, what kind of human does that? What kind of human takes at times the facts and calls them fake news and takes fake news and calls them the facts? His dismissal of anybody who challenges him. Like there's so many unhealthy aspects to the way that he shows up. And it might be a performance. I think we have to acknowledge the guy has figured out, and you can call it manipulation, but he has figured out how to be successful at a whole multitude of ways. TV star, uh, involvement in sports in ways that brought additional revenue to him, his involvement with business, failing a few times and figuring out what didn't work and then becoming really successful so that people perceived him as something they wanted to attach to, that he would enjoy financial success of. And the places he's been successful, if you say like this guy did this, and this, successful at all of those, and eventually became the president of the United States, he's doing something right. Good or evil involved in that. When he became president the first time, I didn't vote in that election. I did not like in the least degree him or Hillary. When I watched Trump do his acceptance speech after that election, I watched his body language as a man who was just performing and manipulating and something really unhealthy about what's going on in his inner world. I am not a Trump fan by any means. He was president, didn't think that much of it. But the economy up until COVID did pretty well. The left wins now. Now Biden's in office. I watched them play games too. And I didn't trust Joe Biden to be very effective as a leader. And I deeply think he had some cognitive decline in his final years, and that entire party figured out a way to make it look like he hadn't and deny that he had, and still put him up on a pedestal and pretend like everything was okay. And I saw that side cheat and manipulate the system. In a way as to make him look more capable than he was. So now Trump part two gets elected, 2.0. And I see Doge come in, and I am looking into US aid, and I'm watching him start to plan the tariffs. And there are certain things about what he's doing that I cannot stand. But there were other things that he was doing that I thought, the noise is saying that this is going to fall on its face. We're going to end up in a great recession, maybe a Great Depression number 2 when Liberation Day happened with the tariffs. And as I was watching and thinking about all of that, my brain told me that these decisions will be moderately good or really good for the economy. And I took some of the funds of our nonprofit, checked in with our board, got permission to invest some of these, and I put some money for our nonprofit uh, in the market like a day and a half after Liberation Day happened. Market went down. Everybody's saying it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And my brain told me that actually, again, all the negative of Trump aside, this was going to be beneficial to us being able to have some increased income on our income. Um, so I invested it. And I immediately wanted to reach out to the post Mormon community and say, I get it. We deconstruct Mormonism. We start questioning the conservative values that Mormonism taught. We recognize that it's not near as inclusive, not near as nuanced, not near as kind uh, that we wanted to be. And so a lot of us just immediately go right to the other side. And I was hoping in some of these conversations I would have on social media to say, like, hey, slow down. Both sides have some truths. Both sides are BSing you. Both sides want you to think the other side is the bad guy and they're the good guy. Like you said earlier, it's more tribalism. And I was just saying, like, hey, can you guys slow down and just notice that maybe there's a moment here that you could take advantage of and you could sense that it isn't really the sky is falling. There are positive outcomes to some of the actions that the Trump administration took, and that maybe there's ways in your life that you could benefit from that, even if you disagree with the things that you're adamant about disagreeing with. And I think anytime any of us allow ourselves to be put into an echo chamber and only see things from that point of view, we're missing out on other truths. Um, do Again, we could go into any of these things. Like if you were to say, like, Bill, let's talk about Trump's immigration policy. I would go like, well, let's talk about the things that are really crappy and cruel and inappropriate about that. And there is a value in a country that's trying to protect its identity from not allowing a completely open border and allowing people to come in, some of them who want to do harm, some of them who have are criminal and they're going to continue that in your country. And so how do you both protect the perpetuation of a national identity juxtaposed against being kind to people and treating people fairly? And the way politics works is you have to do one or the other to the extreme when really the truth is in the middle in a conversation that nobody's having.
Mhm.
And I all I wanted to do in my moments of raising topics or discussions in the political arena was to try to note to both sides that the truth is almost assuredly somewhere in the middle in a conversation that neither side is having. And that if you saw the world in this middle where I'm at, you might be able to both condemn Donald Trump, his rhetoric, his personality, and you and your family benefit from where his actions and his administration's actions are actually creating an improved economy.
Bill, I think it's also important, both of us are Midwesterners. We saw what happened, the decimation of the manufacturing in the Midwest in particular. And so I think coming from that lens as well, I think is important. On paper, maybe, okay, white liberals got to pay $50 less for a dishwasher made in Mexico. But as a result, these mill towns are devastated and it's replaced with meth. I mean, so I think that there's a human cost that was part of free trade that was, let's just be honest, Bubba betrayed the blue collar guys signing NAFTA, and West Virginia went from being one of the most Democrat states, one of the top states for Bill Clinton, to being one of the top states for Donald Trump. I don't think Democrats need to look in the mirror and realize that, conservatism is a reaction. It's reactionary. And often what it is they're merely doing a response to what they felt was done to them. So all the pain and stuff that people are feeling on the left, that's what was inflicted on the blue collar, on conservatives for decades. And it kind of sucks, but I think we have to realize that we're all accomplices in this kind of messed up country that we live in. And I think it's important to, I don't agree with everything you just said, Bill, but I think it's important to acknowledge what we've seen, what happened to the Midwest, what I saw, what happened to Gary, Indiana, um, Flint, Michigan. I had a job there for a while. I think it does need to be acknowledged, and I think was a real human cost that was done with free trade. So I get that as well. I
Can I
want to
say one
think.
more? Can I
Yeah,
say one more
please.
thing
Yeah,
about
I
that?
wanted you to wrap up, or yeah,
Yeah.
just why don't you do your final words? Respond to that, and then give us your final words, and then we'll close it up.
Yeah. Um, when you have this technological innovation called AI, and every every company in the world that's successful going forward is going to find some way to increase productivity using artificial intelligence. And it's only going to get better and better. And because it's a technology that increases productivity, it's almost assuredly going to cost jobs. But you can't avoid it. If you avoid it, the other guys, Russia, China, other places, are going to just keep going gung ho. And I don't think any of us want to go down the track of a world where the guys that we consider most unhealthy about how they interact with the world being the ones who take the largest advantage of a technology like that. So if you recognize that AI is going to kill jobs on some level, and you've lost, as you point out, much of your manufacturing base, tariffs are a really effective way to force companies to come back into the US to reestablish uh, that segment of your business world. And by the way, it seems to be working in an age of AI where I'm afraid that any moment we're going to see huge drop-offs in jobs. The United States has managed quarter after quarter to have better than expected job growth. I think that's ideally because of two reasons. One, bringing manufacturing back and being the country that takes the lead on AI. Um, I also think that's been good for the market. And people can debate the other positives and negatives, but at least some of the decisions have been productive at job creation, and some of the decisions have been productive for uh, creating a stock market that's doing well. I say that as I look over today, and things are not good today, but we live in that kind of world. Ask a question, and I'll be happy to give any final thoughts. What are you looking for here?
Well, actually, no. I'm the political conversation. I'm done with that. So I guess,
Yeah.
Bill, I want to wrap this up. And just real quick, while you're wrapping this up, actually, I just want to share it with everybody on the screen here. You can go to Amazon and you can get these AI generated books. So we're talking about AI; they're all right there. You can exclusively on Amazon's print to order. Again, that's another great innovation that we've had. Also, want to bring people over to the Mormon Discussion Inc. YouTube channel, which basically has all the stuff that you're talking about. And I'll, of course, include a link to the website that you guys have as well, that everything is set up there. We got all these people here, and you even have me as a friend on MBR. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And so, yeah, Bill, I just would like for you to just kind of give us your final words. And I want to thank you. I asked you yesterday, I said, hey, I want to talk about your books, but I really want to have you do an oral history. And you said, I'm an open book, Steve. And I want to just thank you so much for honoring me and taking this, be willing to go to spaces that maybe you're not most comfortable talking about. And so I greatly appreciate it. So I leave the floor to you.
Yeah, I've been doing this since 2012. Uh, so 14 years.
Well,
I've been in this space. My goal from day one till now has been like, I just want to talk openly and honestly about Mormon history and about Mormonism in general. And I want to help people have enough information that they can make sense of it as well, and then make the best decisions out of informed consent for how they want to navigate their life. And in as much as that has been helpful to anyone, great. And in as much as what I'm saying or sharing or talking about is disruptive to you in ways that are not beneficial to your life, then great. Like go some other direction. Go find information in some other place. Um, no matter what the other side says about me, I have tried really hard to represent my values of justice, authenticity, honesty, vulnerability, and I'm proud of how I've showed up in life and how I've made decisions to be who I am, and I've learned a lot over those years. Often it's our mistakes or our failings that teach us to be a better person. Those are the most transformative moments for us as human beings. And so I've really appreciated the times where I've messed up. And I've tried to be accountable to those when they've happened. I really am trying to still be the best Mormon I know to be, because Mormonism was one of the first places that told me that certain values like honesty, uh, transparency were important. It was just that the system wasn't living up to the messages it was saying, at least not some of those messages. And I still think on some level, I'm trying to be um, a really good Mormon by being honest and truthful to who I am and what I believe.
So I'm going to be a really good Mormon, and I really appreciate you coming on the program today, Bill, and doing this 3 hour intense conversation. But I think it was an important conversation to have in this time and space, and I hope that the audience will appreciate it. Love to get your feedback on it in the comments. I'd be very curious to hear what you have to say, whether it's on Reddit, Facebook, and other platforms, as well as in the comment section on YouTube. Really looking forward to getting people's feedback on this important conversation we had today. We'll have links in the description to everything that we talked about, including Bill's website, where a lot of his resources are. And we also have links in the description for those of you who would like to financially support our program. Those are available there as well. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.